Okay, we will go ahead and call to order the second in a series of 3 budget board workshops, this being for April 30th. And if the clerk would take the roll.
Mayor Ron is absent tonight. Mayor Pro Tem Seneca.
Here.
The clerk's here. Trustee Emery.
Here.
Trustee Fleming.
Here.
Trustee Forsley is absent. Trustee Klebanow.
Here.
Trustee Scott.
Here.
I guess I don't have to call you again. Manager Searle.
Here.
Public Works Director May. Acting Finance Director Parker.
Here.
Economic Development Director and Assistant Manager Kimball.
Here.
Westmont Street Department Supervisor Barrett. Here. Facilities Manager Cherney. Here. Director of Fire Administration Scala. Here. Police Chief Mulhern. Here. Deputy Police Chief Gunther. Here. Deputy Police Chief Brenza. Here. Police Department Administrative Assistant Rice. Here. Fire Chief Trout.
Okay, we will have the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Not quite, but almost. Okay, before we actually get started on the budget review process, I'd like maybe to have Spencer take a few minutes and sort of recap some things, as well as to give some direction for tonight's meeting.
All right, so just wanted to sort of clarify the deal with the packets passed out on Wednesday and the binders delivered on Thursday. So everything that was passed out on Wednesday is also in the binders and is updated in the binder. So other than any notes that you took on Wednesday, you no longer need those sheets. We just need the binders that were delivered on Thursday. And then we also have some new sheets that we have distributed that will go into the binders, and I'll go over that right now. So if you take out the binder clip, you'll see most of them have paper clips. So the first set of items that are paper clipped with the sticky note that say 1 will go in tab 1 right after the summaries and overview sheet. You can replace the 2 sheets that are there currently. You take those out and then replace them with the 4 sheets that are paper clipped together that have the 1 on them. And then the next set go in divider number 2 right at the very end. So just before divider number 3, you'll see a series of pages that look like this, that look identical to the ones that are here as number 2. So take those out and put in the paperclip number 2s.
Where did those forms?
The very excuse me, they go at the very back of tab 2, right before tab 3.
Okay.
So you can replace the ones that are currently there. And then the next section is tab 8. And this will go right underneath the Westmont Center dividing tab. So underneath the Westmont Center dividing tab, there's one that says fund revenue. So you'll pull out the one from the binder that says fund revenue right under the Westmont tab and replace it with the new one that says fund revenue. The next one is in tab 10. Have number 8.
Unless I got it in here, and it was with everything else. I don't have it.
Here too. I can get you one afterwards. It's easier.
Oh, I see it.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm playing catch up.
No problem. Right after the Westmont Center. Okay. And the next one, in tab 10, there's nothing currently in tab 10, so the paper clips 10 goes right in tab 10, right after the blue sheet, the vehicle replacement fund. And then the one that says 11 goes in tab 11, right after the blue sheet that says capital projects fund. And again, there's nothing to replace. It's just going in brand new. And then in tab 12, there's a single sheet. It's got a blue chart, and that one can just go in tab 12, just right after the blue sheet that says water. In the beginning. And then there should be one last sheet that will go in tab 13. And that one in tab 13 will replace the first sheet after the purple sheet. So there's the purple sheet, there's one that says fund revenue, which will come out and be replaced with the new fund revenue.
If you'd like to pass down your replaced sheets, we'll throw those in the recycle bin here. Unless you had notes. You wanted
All right, so we're all done with that. Then let me just do a brief overview of some of the things that have changed and kind of the new items in the packet, and then we'll go into, I guess, some of the questions from last night, if that's all right. So under the first tab, under the summaries and overviews, you'll see our fund summary, and you'll see that the projected net, the 66,000, is higher than the one that we had discussed on Wednesday, but it is the same projected net as was distributed in the binders on Thursday. There were a couple of changes. Staff had noticed a couple of items that were in two budgets and had to be removed from one. For example, there were some things in police's budget they had budgeted for. That was also budgeted in IT, and so we were able to remove those. So you'll notice police went down. Chief Mullern also had requested to make a couple of additional removals from the expense allowance items. And then, so those are the majority of the changes. You'll also notice at the very top there, there's another line that says additional now. And this is we'll go into this in a little bit more detail in just a moment, but this is with regards to some transfers to other funds. So the second sheet, just to go through that, is an expense comparison, and this is very similar to the one that you received on Wednesday as well. It just shows the comparison between the two, between last year and this year. And then the third sheet is the funds carried forward summary. And this sheet lists the cash balance, the estimated cash balance at 5/1/11, not 10. And so this is our anticipated cash balance at the beginning of the fiscal year. Then we've got our revenues, our expenses, the change, and then what we're projecting as our cash balance carried forward. Now you'll notice that some of these funds have very low projected cash balances at the end of the year. And specifically the Convention Tourism Fund, the Capital Projects Fund, and the Motor Fuel Tax Fund. And the Convention Tourism and the Capital Projects Fund, we are looking at transferring some money in to help cover those fund balances. So the next sheet, the fourth one in tab 1, says, the one that says permanent transfers budget for $261,000. And what we have presented right now in this budget is reducing the supplemental sales tax, which is going into the vehicle replacement program, and then, so we'll have more supplemental sales tax going into the general fund, which will then be able to fund transfers to these other funds to be able to have them meet their cash balances so that we don't have a negative cash balance. One item to note with convention and tourism is that convention and tourism won't actually be, when we make the transfer of the 21,000, we won't actually be using this account. We, due to an auditor's entry a couple of years ago, we have an amount that the general fund owes the convention and tourism fund. And so what we'll be doing is using this $21,000 we're transferring in as cash, we'll just be reducing that slightly. And we'll, as we go through the different funds, you can see sort of what makes up the amounts that are in the funds, why the transfer is necessary. But are there any questions at the outset about the general concept of what we're doing?
Well, your projected cash balance then is for April 30th, 2012, not 2011, correct?
Yes, that is also correct. Thank you for pointing that out.
Now, by moving the sales tax from the vehicle replacement program, is that going to be a permanent situation, or are we going to do that temporarily in order to bolster these other funds?
I think that's really a policy decision, depending on whatever the board decides. Right now, we're just planning to do it sort of for this year because we have some additional cash in the vehicle replacement program. We have the money that we're setting aside for vehicle purchases in the future. And so right now we were looking at, we have current deficits in these other funds. It would make sense to cover them at least temporarily for right now. And we probably have enough that we can do it this one time without adversely impacting or making us too close to going low, in the next 10 or 15 years. We should be fine through replacing all of our current vehicles. Assuming that we get back up to the, generally requested amounts in the next couple of years. So if it's a temporary thing, it probably won't have a significant impact on the vehicle replacement program. But if we do it as an ongoing thing, we either need to change our assumptions or make some other determination with regards to that program.
And we have been going through some of the assumptions that we have for replacing certain vehicles, and we've been trying to make adjustments to that. We're doing all this because we're trying to respond, last couple of years when the board has talked about it during the budget time, our impression was, or is, that maybe we should look at trying to redirect some of those resources to other aspects of the budget. So that's the reason that we're suggesting that. Try to address that concern.
So the total dollar amount you're talking about here is $261,000, is that what you're saying?
Yes, that is correct.
Well, if we're talking about doing that and adjusting that, would you be able to take any of that whatsoever and put towards our actual fund as far as a reserve?
Yeah, we could certainly, if it was the board's direction, say we want to put even less sales tax into the vehicle replacement program, have more in the general fund to hit the general fund balance, or transfer it to the emergency reserves if we want to do that. It's just a matter of where we're classifying it. And
I'm just looking at different angles here based on what you read in the newspaper the other day, and I'm sure everyone got that email too.
Yeah.
Illustrious, which I think we all knew that something was going to happen, and it doesn't look like it's not going to happen, so.
Talking about the governor's proposal
Yep.
to.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think those are some numbers. I don't know about everybody else, but I think that's some numbers we need to look at to pull some of that to put it into the reserve. If we're gonna make some adjustments in the vehicle replacement program as a whole, which we've all talked about it, possibly extending to, maybe a 2-year situation instead of every year, or maybe adjust it, but I think, running with only basically 2 days' worth of funds in a reserve fund is not a good thing to do.
We're going to have to bulk up the reserve fund as much as possible because, everybody in Springfield is pretty confident that the municipality's share of revenues from the state are going to get cut drastically. It's not going to be overlooked or delayed. So until we know what that is, we have to do our disaster preparedness.
Ron, during the early stages of the budget, when you gave each department their goal, did you do that with this in mind, knowing that the sales, our tax sharing could be a little bit in jeopardy?
Well, we've talked about it. Have we prepared, exact scenarios that we could react to? We have not done that yet. Our intent this year was to finish the budget, and that would be the next thing we just go right into.
Okay.
In terms of identifying different options. We talked about it, and I think everybody in the preparation of their budget was mindful of the fact that that threat's out there, so they've worked very hard to try to, make sure the expenditures were exactly what we needed.
I know it was a ton of work on behalf of the department heads and the departments themselves. But last year when we had the tiers, Tier 1 cuts, Tier 2 cuts, Tier 3 cuts, I would rather rely on the department heads as to priorities and cuts than have us make those decisions. So even though it was a ton of work, it was extremely helpful knowing what the prioritization of the cuts was based on those tiers.
I know some departments have worked on some of that on their own already because they understood that, we had that concern. We didn't push it real hard this year because we were in a better position with the general fund than we have been the last couple of years. But certainly before the next budget workshop, we can pull some of that information further together.
I think we're going to have to.
Okay.
I think so.
I think part of my concern is I'm not so sure or confident that we will even know what's going to happen before we approve this budget.
I don't think so.
To me, it would make good managing sense to go a little deeper than we think we need to go. I'd rather err on the side of caution than to make the assumption it's not going to hit us hard and then end up with a budget that's not manageable. I'd rather find that we had some surplus.
I agree, and that means that when we do the budget and the departments look at it, it's like things that you can hold off till the end of the year cut first. So, you're not buying things that you say, oh, I should have bought this because now I don't have the money for something that's higher on the priority. You're going to even have to prioritize date-wise so that if we don't, by some miracle, don't get our tax share cut, then we're good to go on all the spending and purchases. But if we do get it cut, you haven't reversed and bought something that was of lower priority than something you don't have room now to buy. So just a suggestion.
Did you say that this extra money was coming out of the sales tax that we had set aside for auto replacement?
Yes, that's the proposal then, is to set aside a little bit less than what we would expect that we should be setting aside if we were to plan to be able to fund it
But
fully.
there'll still be something coming in from sales tax?
Yes.
in there. Do we, because when this was brought up before, when I wanted to stop the vehicle, they kept saying we can't because it was put that way when we did the sales tax.
We're not
We told them.
stopping
That's what I was wondering, though, because we're not stopping it, we don't need to go back and readjust, because I didn't know if we gave anybody a
No,
specific amount.
we've made our margins thinner, and
Okay.
Spencer's going to show you a graph, I think later on, right, where we show, or we already looked at those graphs in the committee for the vehicle sales.
Yeah, I don't have them tonight. I can bring them
Okay.
to the next one for sure. But yeah, would be this similar to the graph
Okay,
that we
I'm just
looked at
making sure we
previously.
don't need to come back and do something legally to slim down how much is going into that account. That's all I was
No,
just checking.
we've changed some of our assumptions on replacements. And if you will recall that graph, there was like 3 different scenarios. I don't know, maybe we can have that for the next
Because we
workshop
even
to look at.
started, Deputy Chief Brenza had started by foregoing one of the squad cars, and it was
Right.
there was a narrowing of the police under vehicle replacement fund, and then we started working into fire and all that. So like Ron said, there still is a vehicle replacement fund, it's just not as aggressive as it
Okay,
was.
as long as we don't have to change, I just didn't know if we needed to do something legally. If we specified
Oh,
a
as far as
certain
the
amount.
sales tax? Yeah, we talked about that.
If we specified a certain amount,
We-
whether it was 1/4% or whatever, I didn't know if there was a specific amount
Right.
we said was going in that.
Right. No, we don't have to do that. We talked about that yesterday. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it
Okay.
was just a general,
It was just saying
Sales
some of
tax.
that sales tax was going in there.
right. And
So
we were
no-
explaining, I mean, we explained to the board tentatively that, the plan was to contribute a portion to that.
Okay.
That would be a revenue source to help fund it. But we've never codified that because we have been, the last couple of years, putting some into police pension as well, and then also having the remainder in the in the
Okay,
general
I
fund.
just want to make sure we
So,
didn't legally
yep.
step into something. Thank you.
Anything else on that?
Sure. Okay. So those transfers are the reason for the majority of the replacement pages. That's why we had to replace the general fund revenues because they changed, the vehicle replacement fund revenues because they changed. So those transfers were the majority of the replacement pages that we all just did. Are there any questions with regards to the binders, things within the binder, any changes? If not, we can go into some questions about what had happened, some of the questions we gotten last time. So we have passed out a graph that looks like this. It's got 2 graphs on it, and this is in regards to the question that was raised about the water usage at the 500 North Cass building. Excuse me. The first chart at the top has a red line and a blue line, and this shows the usage and the cost. And obviously, as the usage goes up, the cost goes up, and that's not surprising at all. What you'll notice is that it was fairly low and consistent up through fiscal year 2008, 2009, and then in 2009-10 and 2010-11, it jumped significantly. And we're fairly certain that this is due to the fact that was brought up last time with the cooler that IT has, the water used cooler to be able to keep the servers cooled. So that is the reason for the increase on an annual basis. And then the second chart is the one that looks at billing cycle by billing cycle for the last 2 years. And you can see that between July and September, the amount that we got billed for in that period was significantly higher this year than in the previous year. And I mean, obviously, there's no way to tell exactly 100% what caused it, but during that same period, we did have some issues with a leak and flooding, and we did have some issues with a broken ice machine that was pulling water but not making the ice. And those issues have been addressed and resolved, and we believe that, it looks like that has solved the problem, and as you can see, the green line is now back underneath the purple line. So we're back to average usage again comparative to the prior year. Now, when the budget was being made originally, we had some of those higher bills and had not had the lower bills again. And so I think there's a little bit of overestimation in the utilities account based on looking at our usage there. We have reduced the amount in that utilities account from 17,000 down to 15,000. It looks like right now we've spent almost 11,000. We've got another close to $2,000 for our March bill that's on the finance ordinance for this coming board meeting, and then we still have another one out there. So we're assuming 15,000 is a good conservative number. I would expect we probably won't be higher than that next year. I would expect we'd be lower, but to be conservative, we wanted to do that. I think the chief has a comment. And Glenn probably too.
Well, Glenn's following me, and my conversation with Glenn this week also, and I'll let him address it. With the consolidation of the communication center, there is plans to redirect the current air conditioning system from the comm center into the server system, which will probably reduce or maybe even, I'll let Glenn talk about, eliminate the need for the water cooler. And Glenn?
Yeah, once we could cool that room, and that room, the water cooler only runs when that room needs additional cooling. So as that room is cooled by the regular HVAC system, that system slowly shuts itself down. The problem is when it can't keep up with the heat load in the room, the water usage increases through the water-cooled system. So once the standalone air conditioning system right now that cools just the dispatch center is redirected into that room, the water-cooled system should only be used when that system is actually non-functional. And we believe that, Steve, that should be enough to cool that room, so.
When does that go into effect? Is it in effect now with the consolidation?
No, it will be as soon as dispatch is out of there and the heat load in that room is reduced.
Target date?
May 23rd for dispatch, so, I mean, within the month after that, we should be able to redirect.
Could we have, so May 23rd, and then you take out and redirect and all that. So would you start watching it as of July 1? And report back to the board during the month of July what, that you're starting to watch it. Then I would like a 90-day watch to see whether it significantly drops. If it significantly drops, that's wonderful. If it doesn't, there are going to be other cuts to water usage in that building.
Yeah, we can actually see a chart on how many gallons per hour run through that unit. So
Okay.
we can actually give you a chart after the system's redirected, how much water is actually going through the system, so.
Okay, so that we can compare. And so just a heads up, I'm not going to kid anybody. If there is a continual use of village water, I mean, we're looking at, when we see this one spike, a 300% increase in water usage. And if the residents are paying for all that, of course, and if there is an abuse of the water in that building through the washing of personal vehicles, which nobody else gets that perk, I want it to stop, period. So that's why I want the watch on how much water is being used in water cooling versus how much water is being used to wash personal vehicles.
Trustee, the other thing we will track also as well too is we do our host site for training facilities, NEMERT, the Northwestern class. That could result in some of an uptick. That Northwestern class is a 2-day cost. So in this 90-day watch, we will also have when the training sessions were and try to see what the dates if that had anything to do with it as well.
I don't think that's spiking.
I don't, but it's compared to our everyday use, it's an additional use, which isn't every day. We keep track of our training and the use of the training center, so we'll be able to watch that as well.
All right, thank you.
Anything else on that, Spence?
That's good, unless anybody has any other questions on that. Glenn, before you go back away, another question.
Fast. He's supposed to walk on it.
There were also some additional questions that had come up about the IT budget last time.
Yeah, I watched those meetings, so I'm aware
Okay.
of a lot that came up, so.
So if you wanted to kind of go through in tab 3 under the information technology and professional services where it has network security, the parentheses 64, the question was raised, is that hours? And, could you give a little bit of explanation about the rate?
Yeah, it's a contractor rate we have with a contractor. It's $110 an hour for the contractor for doing our firewall and our switch programming, which is the high-level security programming on the network itself, which is actually a really good negotiated rate. We have a contract with another vendor that is handling the point-to-point microwave between us and Downers Grove, which would put on more of a realistic scale of where the rate would be in, and they're $185 an hour. And then it goes up from there. So the $110 rate that we negotiate with a single vendor works out really well in that line item.
Glenn, as long as you're up there, I'd like to ask you something because it would pertain to your budget. We discussed at Thursday's Committee of the Whole the possibility of an independent contractor relationship for IT. And my question is, because I'm concerned about, the liability insurance and all of this, and I think it might be a win-win if we brought the person on staff, which would affect the budget, okay? So, in order to budget for if it stays independent contractor, how many anticipated hours for that type of work versus part-time, bringing them in as a part-time employee of the village?
Well, there's a couple ways to look at this. I wrote Ron a little memo on it as well. One of the things, talking with the current contractor, was removing any necessity to run wiring. And I've talked to Steve May, and we could run all of the wiring in-house through facilities or with full-time IT staff. So the only thing that contractor is left to do at that point would be to run the video for the meetings, which doesn't involve much liability at all. In dealing with other towns as well, those towns for that similar type position contract with outside contractors without requiring insurance for those positions, because it's a very minimal amount of liability.
Right, yeah, I was concerned about the security work, firewalls, that kind of thing, or...
The person that we're talking about wouldn't be doing that anyhow, because there's the level of knowledge for that person doesn't hit that level of our pay area. So the only thing that person ever functioned in was the main level, which is just the video production and running wire.
Okay.
So
your recommendation is to keep that as an outside contractor versus a part-time employee for X number of, we know how many times we video things
Correct.
in this building. So what's your preference?
I would prefer to keep it as an outside contractor. One of the things we were going for is probably get 2 contractors in here, so we're not stuck in the same boat we were when the previous contractor fell ill, where we're relying on one person. What we're trying to do is get 2 people in here. They would share responsibilities, and they would split the workload. So it's about 20 hours a week with the meetings is
Okay.
what we use that person.
Good, thank you.
And then also with facilities, it allows us to work much closer with running the wiring and all that. And
Okay.
we've been working with them slowly over the last couple of years, and it's worked out really well, so.
Do you have any other part-time, not part-time, but independent contractor that would have been in the same capacity running wires or doing something?
No.
Okay.
The only other independent contractor we have is the person that's in that $110 an hour price range, and they don't run any wiring. It's just strictly programming our routers and our switches, so.
So insurance is not a problem on that issue?
No, but that person does carry,
Oh,
he does
okay.
have $1 million liability. He owns his own company, so.
Okay, so he is protected, so the only one that would have been this new contract
Correct.
coming through? Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
good, thanks.
No problem. I know there was something else, and I can't remember.
Other questions on IT?
Anything else on IT? So Glenn doesn't have to keep running back and
That's fine.
forth?
Was there anything, let me ask you this, is there any special work that would need to be done over at Westmont Center with, if we do enter into a lease with Marker?
No.
Is there work that your department has to do?
Very minor. The biggest thing is pulling out all the old wiring that's there, because we can actually recover and reuse some of the connectors that are very expensive in there that we put in for COD. So we are going to be doing that next week. We were going to have the other contractor do it, but I'll probably work with facilities to pull out the old stuff. We don't like leaving old lines in, so we pull out anything we can as soon as we're done, and you can't anyhow.
It's against
Yeah,
code.
Yeah.
Fred won't let you.
Yeah. The old time, people would leave everything in, so we pull all that stuff out, and then they're doing their own build out. So the only thing we have to do is bring the facilities up to the second level, which is really easy for what they're
Okay.
doing.
Good,
We already met with them, so,
all right.
okay,
Is
thanks.
that it for IT? Thank you, Glenn.
Okay, and I know another question that came up at the last meeting is addressed at the very back of tab 5 under the police pension section. And there was a question with regards to one of the graphs that was not as updated as it should have been with regards to levy year versus fiscal year. And the binders now have updated charts, and I've put fiscal year and levy year at the bottom to make it a little bit clearer and easier for everybody to understand. They're right at the very back of tab 5, right before tab 6. So right before tab 6, there's the detail on the police pension, and then there should be 2 graphs. Right there. So The first graph under the police pension one shows the village's contribution of the annual required contribution. And you can see in there, in fiscal year 11, levy year 9, which is our current year, we had a significant increase up to about 82.3% estimated. And then in fiscal year 12, levy year 10, we're estimating at about 97.1%. The difficulty is that we can't ever know for sure what it is at this point because we haven't gotten the newest numbers from the actuaries yet. So we do at 105% of the prior years and hope that we get close. The next chart is and I'm sorry. So this chart was the one that this chart was the answer that I was giving, even though the question was about the next chart. So you can ignore my answer from last time, because I answered about a different chart that wasn't there. So this second chart is the chart where the question originated. And you can see there, fiscal year 2009, levy year 2007 was the year that we had the drop, which Trustee Emery had asked about. And then the last year, the most recent one for which we have the firm audited numbers, we did see an increase in our assets again. So again, I apologize for giving the right answer to the wrong chart.
Thank you, Spencer. And I like where it's got fiscal year and levy year. That
Yeah, I
makes it a
think
little
that
easier.
makes it a little bit less confusing for me.
For us, too.
Okay, the one other item I wanted to mention that was addressed at the last meeting, back in tab 3 under legislation. Under the training section, it was requested that we specifically list in the budget, make it very clear that the only elected official that we're going to be paying for will be the mayor, and no expenses will be paid by the village and reimbursed. So that language is there on the first page of legislation at the very bottom right underneath training. And wanted to make sure that that is noted, and if anybody would like any different language or anything changed, we can edit that.
Very good.
Wanted to make sure that it was clearly indicated in there.
Let me throw something else in there. Didn't we say last year that for IML, we were paying for the mayor and for Ron?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
in my budget.
Yeah.
Yes,
It's in administration.
Yeah.
yes,
we were
Ron does
actually-
have
Oh,
one in
okay, so you're under
administration.
administration, not legislative. Okay.
Right.
I just didn't want you to get cut out
No,
of
no,
the
no,
process, Ron.
it's still there.
Okay, good.
Okay, were there any other questions that came up last night that I have missed or forgotten? Any other questions from the prior items we've covered?
Anybody think of anything we've missed? Okay.
All right, then I guess we can jump to fire. For one thing, I just want to point out, back again in tab 1, we've got the preliminary cuts. And again, the preliminary cuts kind of go through each of the different departments. And you can kind of look through them as we're talking about fire. You can see that fire did make some significant cuts and some significant reductions that are listed here. And we'll go into them a little bit more as we get into the department, but the list of the cuts from what they'd originally requested to what the final budget that you see are included in the preliminary cut section. So in the fire department, under suppression and control, we've got fire protection, which is the 30,000, the pass-through for the 2%, and that's there the same as every year. And then we have fire suppression and control, and the budget variance report that's listed here kind of shows you some of the different changes and why things increased. The major increases that you're going to see are in the other grant expenses, there's $98,000 for a fire paging grant, and obviously that's a prime example of the kind of expense that we like to see an increase because it's grant funded and we're getting the offsetting revenue. You'll also notice there's a $106,000 contribution here for part of the ongoing cost for the dispatch. Fire indicated that they would like to be helping with this and contributing to it because the dispatchers do dispatch fire as well as police. So the cost the ongoing cost that we'd be paying to Downers Grove is split between fire and police. And so that's another 106,000 of the increases there. I think the others are, the other items are kind of covered in the preliminary cuts, and they're the sort of the general reductions that had to be made. I don't know if you have any specific questions in this category, or if Frank, anything you'd like to ask?
Chief Trout, were a number of these, like the uniforms reduced and some of the equipment because of the, I think it was 52 new full setups of gear for fire suppression were under that previous grant that just went through, where Eric, we had a public safety meeting where Eric showed us all the stuff that they got with the grant. So you were able to cut this stuff, or was this things that you're cutting that you would otherwise buy even with that grant?
When we got the grant, we feel that as far as our personal protective equipment, coats and boots, helmet, those items, we can probably make it through another year. There is a little money in that account in case we should have any type of replacement problem. But since we had the department have that great influx of grant money from last year, we're going to hold on and see if we can make it through the rest of the year.
Okay.
So
Good.
that's how that was planned.
Okay, thanks.
Right, any other questions in suppression and control? Okay. In ambulance and paramedics, obviously the major item there is in the second page, the paramedic contract with Kurtz. And while you will note that it did go up from the prior year's contract, it was scheduled to go up much more. And fire was able to negotiate that to a lower rate, and I believe that's on the agenda for discussion for the contract. So the amount that is listed in the budget is the amount in the proposed contract right now. That is the major change there. Any questions about ambulance? Okay. EMA is very, very consistent. There was no net change in the dollar amount. There's a little bit that was moved, from place to place, but no net change to the budget. Any questions on EMA? Okay. Public Works Administration. Excuse me. Again, not a lot of changes. And once again, with Public Works as well as all of the other departments, the detail on the specific preliminary cuts that they made is discussed back in the preliminary cuts section, back in tab 1. So that section will give you the full list of all the different individual cuts that were made. So you can kind of look at that in tandem with this. But one thing that you will notice is maintenance services building went down. It was 4,000. It's now reduced to 0. And that's the major change. But the reason for that is twofold. Number one is move the heating and cooling to the streets account to better account for it. And then also we're looking at the elimination of the rug service there in that one specific building section to be able to kind of see how it works without it. Any questions in Public Works Administration?
What's TDML stand for?
Something close to total daily maximum load. It has to do with our, the NPDS or the pollution discharge in the way. So it's county-related fees for participating in that.
Okay.
Total daily maximum load, I think is what it stands for.
And so that's money paid to the county?
Right. There are some things this is a bigger story, but as a municipality, we have our own responsibilities under the national permit. And DuPage County, in a good way, collected all the communities, and some of the things that are common to all, and like the public education aspects of it, they took that all on. So much of what our responsibilities are done by the county as a whole, and we all participate together.
And you've got 5,000 budgeted for miscellaneous engineering because, I mean, we know from past practice that something always comes up that you need,
That's the only reason that's there, is if something comes up and somebody comes to a board meeting or they want something investigated,
Yeah.
you don't ever want the answer to be it's not in the budget, it has to wait till next year to even look at it. So this is if we have to hire a surveyor or something like that.
Okay, good.
Anything else in Public Works Administration? Okay. Facilities, you can see from the budget variance report that, and you'll also see from the detail in there, that we had a part-time position in facilities which moved to full-time. So their budget went up, but it was offset by a position in the street division, which was full-time, which was replaced with part-time. So it looks like facilities went up because they have now a part-time person went to full-time, but it was offset the other direction in the streets department. The other major increase in facilities budget right now is the fire alarm at the train depot, and there's a little bit here for the police range mold remediation, and both of those are in account 50-50-43. No, they're not. I'm sorry. They're in the 70-70-62, I guess the second to last page.
Capital outlay.
Yeah, under capital outlay, you see the fire alarm system for the depot, and then police range mold remediation. And I know Mike or Steve can give a little bit more information on the fire alarm at the depot, but my understanding is that we're out of compliance with code, and it's the strong recommendation of the fire department that we install this alarm there to be in compliance.
Strong recommendation by our fire department staff. The high-end bid, preliminary bid, was $20,000. I'll be meeting with Frank's staff shortly to get looking over the 5 or 6 bids and proposals.
Mike, if you want to come to them.
Sure. Looking over the 5 or 6 bids and proposals that we have, the highest being at $20,000, the lowest being at $6,500 right now, and moving forward with Frank's staff to say this is exactly what we need. When I went to Spencer, I gave him the high-end proposal.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions about that or facilities?
Frank, do you know what it is they're going to put in?
We need the wireless technology in that building. Right now, all we have is the battery-operated smoke alarms.
Such as pull stations or other type of devices needed?
Yes.
I believe that was part of it, yeah.
Okay. So it'll be upgraded to what the standards are for the village for that type of structure. And that's why we're going to be meeting and going through over all the technicalities.
And I'm looking to incorporate the minimum standards, what we need minimally to take care of that building.
Good.
Yeah, because I know from experience, everybody runs out of that building on a regular basis. So, I mean, it just seems weird to have,
Yeah, they know how to vacate quickly.
yeah, they do. As soon as the gates come down.
Annual or daily fire drill.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
Thank you.
Is there an alarm where the ticket tellers are inside there?
Like a panic alarm?
No, like a fire alarm on their end of it inside?
I don't think we have anything.
Battery operated.
Just
Smoke
that
alarm.
battery, okay, even on their side, okay.
I don't know for sure what's in their office, but that's the only technology in that building.
You know, it's something that every year or every couple of years when we've had our IMAP or whatever it was before that Irma would always say, we'd recommend you doing this, and Now we felt, we're talking about this for so many other commercial entities in town that we felt like, we ought to set the right example, and of course, the fire department said we need to do it, so we're going to put it in.
Right. The next item is street operations. And there were many cuts. You can see lots of reductions here in the budget variance report and as you look through the detail. And a lot of them are described in detail in the preliminary cuts. But the one thing that I kind of wanted to draw your attention to is, and it's in several different accounts, you'll see different pieces of this. And this is the tree replacement for the emerald ash borer problem. So you'll see here, under professional services, you'll see several different places where it says, EAB, tree planting house, EAB, tree removal and stumping, $0, and there's $0 amounts. And Steve can go into this a little bit more, but this is the amounts that we were originally looking at if we were to have an outside contractor come in and do it. It would have been in professional services. So we're not planning to have an outside person come in and do it. And then you will see on the second page under purchase land improvements, we've got EAB Parkway, 40 trees for $10,000. And it says under there's a possible $20,000 grant. We've now found out that we are not receiving that grant. So that possible $20,000 grant is no longer possible.
Right. To clarify, as you said, the portions that were under professional services that were, if we were going to get assistance with that, either with the removal or where it says tree planting, even though it says in-house, we might have bought the trees in bulk out of a different account, and then if we had to hire somebody it depending on how many we plant, we can, in-house, at the most, I think we've planted about 200 in any one season, and that occupies an awful lot of time. So if we were going to do more than that, we would need help with the physical planting. For tree for the nursery or for the replacement, we've got it under the EAB category because, as you all know, we've started with that burden. We did not have a tree replacement program last year either, and we have done various removals throughout the town, and including the just over 100 trees that have already been removed in Oakwood. Should be called Elmwood, I guess. Or Ashwood, yeah. If you just add that all up, if we were going to do a one-to-one replacement for everything that we've taken out in the last 2 years, we would need 200 trees, and there's only 40 in this proposal as it stands right now, so you need to be aware of that. It's just kind of a, I don't want to say token, but it's a small replacement program compared to what was removed.
But we're still removing trees, aren't we? Or
We will be. I mean, we're up to 100 just through the winter, and he's scraped and has already found more diseased trees, further north. So we might get through that whole subdivision this year.
So since we are going to be taking on the burden of doing this, as opposed to outsourcing it, did you factor any additional time into your overtime assumptions?
We're not spending any overtime on it. So the forester and the crew and the staff we've recently, retained is to concentrate on that. It'll take away from other things like maybe the tree trimming program and alley maintenance and things, but our intent is to do everything we can in-house. This proposal has no professional services for any outside help.
Steve, you may want to emphasize this is only for trees that are on village right-of-way and village-owned property. This will not apply to trees on private property,
That's correct.
Unfortunately.
John will go and, identify and assist anybody with, identifying it on your own properties, but there is no public assistance program yet.
Okay.
I know we had talked about earlier only taking down trees in the wintertime because they were dormant at that point then, or is that something that's not true and we're going to be taking them down in the summertime also where they could fly to another tree then?
We take them down time permitting. In the winter, you're either fighting snow and ice or you've got time to do things like that, and tree removal isn't dependent on the season. There is a big you want to get it all done before, like right now is when the flight season for the Emerald Ash Borer is going to pick up. So it's good to get as far as you can before you get to now, and then, doing it now doesn't help detract from the spread. That's all. But it's still time permitting, we do it.
Okay.
Any other questions in street maintenance?
I need to go back to facilities for a second. We need to add into the budget to do in-house, another door to the executive boardroom, which we'll talk about at a later date.
Different replacement? Oh, I know what you're talking about.
So we were going to do that in-house,
Yeah.
so we'd have to budget the cost of the supplies. So
I'll figure
We
something out.
can make that adjustment.
I was going to say that might fall under your $1,000 miscellaneous you have in there. I can't
Yeah,
imagine that
that's-
being that expensive.
If we're talking over here in the unfinished room and in through there, the executive session room, yeah, that should not be complicated.
Can probably just fit it in.
Okay.
All right. Guess then if nobody has any other questions, on to fleet. The major increase in fleet you will see is on the first page of fleet, under operating supplies and chemicals. It's going from a budget of $255,000 to a budget of $380,000. And that is because we are, it's fuel, budgeting $125,000 more than last year for fuel, to take into account the increase in fuel prices. And that is the,
That's why it's in there twice. We put the typical number of what you would typically see every year, and then the additional entry, the last one, is our projected increase if we really hit $5 a gallon pump price.
any other questions on fleet? Okay. And the next section is health and sanitation, which is fairly straightforward, and that's our mosquito abatement services and also our waste management. The pass-through, we collect the revenue and then waste management bills us for the service. Any other questions about the general fund, public works? Okay. Convention tourism. And now just sort of a little bit of background and I guess sort of an interesting thing we discovered about this fund. You'll all recall that this is the fund where our hotel motel taxes went to originally, and we had decided we wanted to spend down the fund balance, spend down the cash balance, and then in last year's budget, we moved several expenses, about $100,000 worth of expenses, over to legislation and administration items such as, our public relations coordinator, payment to the chamber, a lot of those items. Well, we found out this year that back in 2009, the auditors had made an audit adjustment where at the end of April, the village had negative cash in the general fund. So we didn't have a positive balance of cash in the general fund. And that's not that uncommon because you have several of your revenues that are offset. So you don't get to count all the revenues that you don't get for the next couple of months as part of your cash. So what happens is the auditors say, well, technically, according to accounting standards, you don't have negative cash waiting for more money to come in. You're really borrowing somebody else's cash. And so they make the adjustment that says, okay, convention tourism transferred $260,000 to the general fund, and you need to pay them back. And then what would typically happen would be once we get the comprehensive annual financial report, then by the time we get the report completed, we've already got our sales tax in, we've got our property tax in, we have the cash. And so then in theory, you would transfer the cash back, just make the second entry on your books. And so it's just in the CAFR for the auditors, they have to have it say this thing. They say make the adjustment, we make it, and then we make it back the other way. The problem is, back in 2009, we never made it back the other way. So we've had sitting on our books since 2009 saying the general fund owes the Convention and Tourism Fund $260,000. So last year, we said, well, we have enough cash in the general fund, we're going to start assuming some of those expenses. And so this year, what we're doing is we didn't want to do the whole, okay, we changed accounts last year, we're going to change it back this year, and then change it back next year. So what we're doing is we're leaving the expenses, they're all being coded to the accounts they were last year in legislation and administration. But you'll see here, we've also budgeted an expense in convention tourism for $101,000 to reimburse the general fund for covering the types of expenses that could be done with convention tourism funds. So what will happen then is at the end of the year, once we've seen how much we've actually paid for these items in the budget, the general fund will technically we'll record on our books that we transferred the money to the Convention Tourism Fund, and then we'll record that the Convention Tourism Fund, with that money, said, okay, you don't owe us as much, and now we're going to reduce the expenses that you had to reimburse you. So it's a big accounting mix-up, but the bottom line is this $101,000 that's here is not coming out of cash. That $101,000, we have already assumed it's coming out of the cash in the general fund. So we're budgeting it here with the assumption that we're transferring money in to cover it. Don't know if that is very clear. It's kind of confusing and odd. It's a muddy issue. It would have been much easier had the money just been transferred back originally, but it was not.
Yeah.
The other change in item that you'll see in here is you'll notice we've continued to fund our Westmont Auto Mile funding in here, and then we also have our downtown development grants. And right now we've historically been budgeting $30,000 to cover that. And then there's a proposal that is listed here next, the $25,000 for retail rental subsidy. And I'll let Fred go into a little bit more. Is Fred here?
He will be back shortly.
He will be back.
Yeah.
When Fred's
We
back,
can come back to that.
he can go into a little bit more detail about that one. So we'll come back to that. He is here. The next tab is the Westmont Center. And the first item there that you'll see is the revenue amount. And you'll see in here right now, because we don't know for sure what's happening with Marker School, we just wanted to at least let you all know that we are budgeting for it here. So it is included in the revenues currently. Looking into the expenses, there's not a lot of significant changes. A little bit here and there. But it's overall, it had a decrease. If you look at the very last page, last year we had budgeted $56,000. This year we're only budgeting $55,900. So it went down slightly, but no significant increase in the expenses.
What's the transfer from the general fund?
Okay, so in revenues, in the convention tourism, that is the $21,000 transfer from the general fund. So right now, as it stands with the cash balance and taking out the $101,000 that will be transferred in and transferred back out, with the cash balance we have right now in convention tourism, if we have all these expenses that are currently listed in the budget, we will have a negative cash balance. And so that transfer from the general fund of $21,000 is part of the reduction in the amount we're putting into the vehicle replacement program. And then instead, we're transferring it in to offset what would otherwise be the negative cash balance in the convention tourism fund. So the slight subsidy with Westmont Center, you know, the expenses are slightly over, it's the rental revenue. That amount plus the amount we're planning to fund the Westmont Auto Mile, plus the facade grants and the additional retail rental subsidy would put us just over $21,000 over our current cash balance.
So we're running Westmont Center at a significant loss.
So the rental revenue we have in here is about $42,000. And then, as you see from the total expenses, it's about 55, almost 56,000. So it's about a $14,000 loss each year.
And that's if our HVAC system keeps eking along.
Yes.
That's if Marker moves in.
Yes.
That's if Mark
Assuming that
moves in.
too, yeah.
Yes.
What do the wrecking ball services cost?
I'm all for that.
Actually, Mr. Chorney is here, who is our facilities manager. And I'm sure that he could give you a little insight to the HVAC system in this building as to what's entailed a little bit, if you'd like to know.
Nobody knows what's entailed.
It's, well, we all know it's a nightmare. I mean,
It's kind of like a residential for a commercial.
That's
what it makes me think of.
It's not really, it was some kind of a special type system that was designed.
It's too heavy.
It's,
It isn't
yeah.
utilized correctly, and then that's prematurely failing.
Is the ticking getting louder from the bomb sitting on the top of the building?
Well, it's had, what, 3 compressors replaced over there? I think it's 3 compressors have been replaced for a period of time.
Yeah, 2. I can't remember between this building and that.
3 in this building, I
Three in
think.
this
I thought we had
Three in
3
3
here.
here. I don't think it's 3 over there.
We've had 3 over in that building also.
And the windows don't open, so they have to use air.
Well, I got to keep asking, when we sit here and we say to our residents, we don't want to tax you, we don't want to raise rates, we don't want to cut services, why we are making a decision to run something at a loss for the benefit of a few to the detriment of many. I don't like it, but I'm only one.
I think there are a number of us that agree with you.
I mean, I guess the question is, what would be the option that we could do with this particular, as I have called it for a while, a white elephant?
Exactly what it is.
I mean, at one point, we couldn't even sell this building. We were restricted that the restrictions that were put on this building were, because it was built with hotel, motel, grant funds, and everything that went along with that. There was something that dealt with that at one point.
Okay,
Because
yeah.
the way it was funded.
Yeah.
But I thought that changed once it was.
It's different now.
Yeah, it's different
As a
now.
home
Okay,
rule.
so, I mean, we technically could put a for sale sign on this thing.
Oh, yeah, we, if that would be the board's direction, we can do that.
Who would buy it?
Well, that's the question.
It's not the
You
best
know,
market
I mean,
at this time, obviously,
Plus,
for
who would
that.
buy it for the worth of income versus the cost to maintain?
And no parking.
I mean,
I mean, it's nice to sit there and say we have our state rep and senator in the building
right.
Chamber and
and chamber, but at what cost?
But we have a bunch of vacant storefronts that, the chamber, Larry Forsberg, I'm sure could talk to somebody that paying what they're paying at the Westmont Center is better than the landlord getting zero, for a vacant building and all of that. I just,
We have a big overflow room sitting right next
Yeah, I
to
mean,
us.
we've got 2
Right,
things
I mean,
right
this
there on
is-
the floor.
So I'll tell you, you can guess where my vote's going on executing a lease, and 12 years is preposterous, so's 7 days. This is ridiculous. The residents of this town are supporting, it's a money pit. So I just assume tear this whole page out and tear that building down. This is ridiculous. Sure, it's nice looking, it has a lovely useless atrium, but it's a money pit, and we can't afford money pits. And, if I was a salaried employee here and for 2 years I got a zero raise while we're dumping money into that thing, this is crazy.
I mean, even with Marker coming in, we still operated at a loss.
And if they don't come in, that loss is even bigger.
It sucks big time.
do you want to have a special item on a future agenda just to talk about?
Yes.
Yeah.
What we'd like to do?
I think
Let's
it's
first
time.
put it on finance and admin.
Admin, okay.
And we'll talk about it at the committee level,
Good.
and then
Bring it to the
And then
board.
let's bring it to the committee of the whole so that it's in front of the village.
Okay.
But I thought we were supposed to be adjusting the rent to cover these things, but we're not?
No, we are, but it's a 3-year period.
The way the leases fall.
Yeah.
Aren't
Well,
we
those
just
rents
renewing
would,
one?
those rents would never cover catastrophic
No.
if that heating air conditioning had to be replaced anyhow.
After the fact, it would be adjusted.
Yeah.
to recover.
Take a long time to recover
But
those
you'd never,
costs.
Be like
you'd
a
never,
condo.
you'd never, yeah, but you'd never get ahead.
Yeah.
You would always be behind.
And if you raise their rents so high.
Can't get ahead, but-
But if you raise their rents so high to compensate for that, they'd be gone anyhow.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's put it on the committee and let's address it on its own.
Okay.
Okay.
You know, this might be a good time to
Want to take a break?
take a break
Okay.
for a short period of time.
Oh,
Do we need a motion for that?
Motion to
No, the
recess?
chair can call it.
I will call a recess.
There you go.
A short period of time.
Probably, you should say like for 15 minutes or something like that, so,
I would say between 15 and 30 minutes.
okay.
And reconvene the meeting. So I will give it over to Spencer to continue on. You had a couple of more things you said with Westmont Center, I believe?
Yeah, still in the convention tourism tab. So the one item we had started discussing, I mean, we just sort of mentioned that it was there. So in the convention tourism tab on tab 8, right behind convention tourism, you see the list of the different expenses for convention tourism. And at the very bottom of the list, under the downtown development grants, is an item labeled retail rental subsidy for $25,000. And Fred is going to go into a little bit more detail about that.
Thank you, Spencer. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess the document is dated April 27th, 2011, and this grew out of a meeting that the mayor convened, I believe it was early last fall, where he asked that staff put together a list of real estate brokers, developers, downtown building owners, and just get together over a cup of coffee and try to brainstorm for some ideas as to what we might be able to put on the table that would help fill some of the vacant storefronts in our downtown B1 business district. And one of the things that came up was that in addition to the downtown development grants that we now offer for facade improvements, the board may recall that it's a 50% matching grant for eligible facade improvements such as front doors, awnings, signs, gooseneck lighting, windows, that sort of thing, 50% matching up to $5,000. And then a couple of years ago, the board opted to add a second category of eligible expenses to the downtown development grants and allow for things like code upgrades to new electrical panels, plumbing upgrades, making bathrooms ADA accessible, and the like. That was another 50% grant up to $3,000. So now we can offer up to $8,000 per new business in the way of a downtown development grant. Well, out of this meeting that we had with the downtown building owners and the brokers and the developers, one of the things that was suggested, how about some assistance for a new retail business that would start up on their rent up front? And so what we've done is we've just kind of thrown out a number for discussion here. If the board would like to appropriate an amount of approximately $25,000, we've got kind of a list of dot points that we thought might be suggested guidelines that we could use in administering such a program to make this a third category in our downtown development grant program. And basically the way this would work, this would be a rent subsidy program that would work for the first 3 months of new occupancy of a formerly vacant property in the downtown, just for retail businesses, because that is our target market down there. This would not be available for offices or, medical facilities, things of that nature. But if it's a retail business, we think that would have merit. This would be a 50% rent subsidy where the village would pay 50% and the landlord would pay 50%. So we'd have to get a participating agreement with the landlord for the first 90 days only. We thought that it would be a good idea to say that the village portion of the rent that is being subsidized could not exceed $2,500 for any one grant. That way we could do a maximum number, a minimum number then, I guess you will, of 10 grants per year to help fill vacant storefronts downtown. The rent subsidies would be available on a first-come, first-served basis. If the $25,000 or whatever appropriated amount is exhausted one year, why, somebody would have to wait till the next year to take advantage of that. A copy of the lease must accompany the grant application. And we would see that it might be advisable to say, how about a period of time between grants? We don't want to do this for the same building year after year after year. So how about a 3-year or a 5-year waiting period in between grants so that the same landlord isn't, repeatedly benefiting or taking advantage of the system here. So we would throw these out for board discussion. We thought the appropriate time to bring this forward would be at the time of the budget to see if you wanted to fit a certain sum of money in there and add this third category to the Downtown Development Grant Program.
Fred, I like the idea. However, I know some building owners give rent-free for the first several months during the build-out process. So in those cases, would this kick in, at the open of business, or?
Well,
Because
that's a good question.
Because if they're in a rent-free
Yeah.
build-out mode.
That's a good question, because some new businesses do build-outs, others don't. They can make use of the facility the way it is. I guess that's a point that's open for
It would have to be
discussion,
looked at.
however the board would like to address that. But I can see where that could become an issue.
I don't have an issue with this if this was a store or a retail establishment coming from another community which has automatic business coming in and where we have sales tax walking in the door day one. But businesses, it takes about, you lose 9 for every 10 that starts. So this is, I hate to say it, but it's good money going to bad 9 times out of 10. And at that point, if you've got it, where you can give this subsidy for somebody moving out of Downers or Hinsdale, like we saw Burridge Lighting came in, something like that.
Or like when Barb came.
Exactly, from Hinsdale, something like that. Well, I don't have a problem with it because we have something that's existing.
So maybe it would be a business trustee that would already be existing in another community that either wanted to do a second location or move the entire business here. You're thinking that would be a more appropriate guideline?
I don't know about the second location, but I at least think if they moved into here, I mean, they're already getting a deal on rent coming into this town anyhow, and it's cutting their costs from where they're at. So, I mean, I'm encouraging that to happen. We'd want to do that, but we don't want to give away the farm either.
I mean, and the other side of it is too, I mean, and we know the situation with in a lot of cases down there, and I don't want to give money to some people who don't do what they need to do to their buildings. But they expect the new tenant to come in and make all those repairs and do that stuff. I just, no. I mean, if you've got a business maybe coming from another town, I'm not necessarily, I wouldn't call it a rent subsidy or whatever. Maybe it's a case that.
It's a moving, to help out moving costs or something like that.
Relocation expense.
Okay, a relocation expense, but not money that is going to go from us to the landlord.
Well, it's not really going to the landlord. And even if it's a relocation expense, it would be the same thing. It just has a different title. The landlord would be, and then we do have some businesses that's the deal they negotiate. They negotiate the deal that I'll come into your building and I'll fix it up. And they do that. I mean, you've had people do that.
But we gave them build-outs.
Right. So, I mean, in that scenario, I don't have a problem with it.
I just, with everything that we've got coming right now, with the new comprehensive plan coming into place and the TIF district going into place at 63rd Street, this is one of the reasons why I wanted these two TIFs to be piggybacked on each other when we went into this bidding process for the downtown district as well as 63rd Street. Now, to me, this is a Band-Aid. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's the way I look at it. It's a Band-Aid. And I don't see spending $25,000 throughout the year. I would rather take the $25,000 and increase the current 2 programs you have right now. If you want to use the funds that way, that's fine. But not to create another program for the downtown district.
I agree. I think because we are looking at a new comprehensive plan, and the 3 presentations that we saw from prospective planners that had bid on the project, they all said that there appeared to be no continuity in what our downtown was, and that it will probably need some major overhauls. I don't see any difference between somebody relocating and somebody coming in. There are some very successful businesses here that started here. I don't like a 5-year waiting period, because if somebody goes under just because that business went under and you have another tenant who wants that space, it's kind of like, well, too bad for you. My preference is that we wait till we figure out what we're doing with downtown before we just start throwing money away. And the whole thing of capping it at 2,500 then is, well, then there's money for 10 businesses to move in. If 10 businesses wanted to move into Westmont, we'd be having some kind of party down Cass Avenue. And to say anything else, we'll go in, when we run out, we'll go into the next one. You know, you're looking at 12, 15 businesses. It's not going to happen with the current state of what our downtown is. It just isn't. We know we've got big problems with the properties. I agree with Trustee Fleming. I think we up the current program, the facade program, for people who are there and who have established or are coming in, and it benefits them, rather than coming up with just this, you know, maybe we'll get a couple more people in, which may or may not work. And we're trying to come up with a plan. And this stuff of shotgun approach is detrimental. It's not going to solve anything. So I would not vote on putting a rent subsidy in.
I can understand everyone's points, but we've also been talking for a long time, as well as the downtown business owners have been talking a long time, about what can we do to get more retail. Yes, the comprehensive plan is going to direct us, with a vision, but at the end of the day, it's still retail. It's still retail that we're going to be looking for. I don't know of a main street in America that doesn't want retail.
What that, Sue, is our buildings aren't conducive to retail.
Right. We're going to.
They're mom and pop, small office buildings. They're not
When
retail.
I say retail, I mean, I mean.
But it's not retail, we're not getting any sales tax out of this.
Out of.
If you're not putting retail stores in there.
Right, I mean retail,
That's service.
like we've got Novel Exchange, that's retail. We've got, frame makers, that's retail.
But that building's conducive to it.
Right, and I think there's going to be a lot more of that, or potentially there could be a lot more of that out there if we're incentivized. If we can whatever. Thank you. Why couldn't I say that word? I mean, we had a conversation with a business from Downers Grove that said, I couldn't come to Westmont because there was nothing to bring me there. So we are definitely missing out on retail businesses because we don't have anything to bring them. I mean, a facade grant is great, it's wonderful, but we tell them how it has to look.
But there are a lot of buildings that we can't get retail in there because they're not conducive to retail. That's why the piggybacking of the TIF.
I mean, I can
bringing
think
in
of several.
developers to tear them down.
I mean, several of them are conducive to retail. Small retail. I'm not talking, anchor stores, not big stores, not,
We've had Burr Ridge Lighting come in,
Right,
okay, because it was cheaper rent.
right.
They were on a main street, and they were close to some other similar
Absolutely.
businesses.
Which is what they wanted.
Exactly. We've got some other people that are looking right now, and we haven't done anything.
And that Lux place just.
And Lux came in.
Right.
So we've been fortunate that they have been coming in, but we've only have a limited number of those stores that would be conducive to that.
Well, I think, the old Sight and Sound, the old photo store.
Don't Sight and Sound, you're right, it would have to be a mom, it'd have to be a mom and pop business
there's 3 or 4
because without 10-foot ceilings, it ain't gonna cut it.
Well, Richmond Station, you can pretty much
Right, I'm
forget
surprised
that.
they even moved in there, honestly,
But-
because of those
But we have
ceilings.
several locations right on Richmond and Cass in that block of buildings that could be conducive to retail. We've got the old Sight and Sound conducive to retail. The flower shop that's going to be moving, that's conducive to retail. The photo store, the karate kung fu place, which hopefully, we have a petitioner for that. We have places.
One of the landlords that participated in our discussion group, if you will, by conference call from San Diego, as the building owner at 138, 140 North Cass. And he felt that, this would be a thing to help him secure new tenants into his building. And I think that's another one that might be appropriate for retail. But
I mean, to say we don't have any place to put retail is saying we need to change the vision down there and do architects.
Well, isn't that the reason why we're doing a comprehensive plan? To try to come up with an idea of what it is that we want as a village?
Well, we know.
No, we don't.
Absolutely, well,
But we don't know what we want.
But we know
it's
we
a
want retail.
It's a modge podge. We want retail, but, I mean, even if you had somebody go into the old photo store, the old Sight and Sound has sat empty for so long now, God only knows what that's like. And I've heard nothing but horror stories and trying to get a hold of anybody, even contact about that building, much less even do this.
Yeah,
Those
there was,
buildings,
there was a business from Downers that wanted to go into Sight and Sound and couldn't get a return phone call from the owner. So she renewed her lease.
A niche. Big business. I never call her back. She wanted to move.
a program like this might change that. I don't think we're in a position to not consider all options. I think it's premature to just say, absolutely not, we're not going to do it. I really think it warrants further investigation. I think it warrants looking at, talking to other communities, talking to businesses in other communities, successful businesses in other communities. Going out and networking. What was it that made you go to Downers? What was it that made you go to Clarendon Hills? I mean, I think this program has merit. I really think it has merit. I'd like to see us at least discuss it further. I wouldn't want to flat out say no.
Okay, that's fine. I don't have a problem discussing it further, but for it to appear in the budget at this point in time, I think is improper. Take it out of the budget.
Well, it's not in the budget.
And we'll talk about, I know, but I mean, what I'm saying is in here is a line for thought or whatever. Take that out of there. If we want to research it further as we go down the line, that's fine. But as putting something in there right now in this upcoming budget, no.
Yeah. Maybe it's premature for this budget. I would agree with that. And perhaps we can send this to the Economic Development Committee and have some discussion and get some input from some of the business owners in town and even the building owners further.
I think we ought to ask Council Levine to make that as part of their program with the new comprehensive
We could
plan.
definitely
Our
do
business
that.
incentives, that's part of what they'll do.
We could definitely do that, and you'll be meeting with them very soon.
Let them do the work that we're hiring them to do. Throw things like this at them, see what
Sounds
their
good.
thoughts are.
That sounds
okay?
good.
Are we going to leave the development grants at the current dollar value then, or do you want to take a portion of
they're
this
not,
dollar?
Just leave it at its
Leave it alone,
number right now.
remove the
Have
subsidy.
we ever exhausted that
The
fund?
subsidy.
The 30?
We've
No.
never exhausted the fund
not in
yet,
any
so
given year, no.
Right.
it just isn't going to happen. Okay, anything else on that, Fred? Spence?
All right. Any other questions or comments on Convention Tourism Fund?
Nope.
Okay. So tab 9, the next couple of funds, and this one has the employee benefit sick time. You'll see there, as always, there's a whole lot of activity. We have a whopping $100 estimated in revenue from interest, and that's about it. When we pay out the sick time, it just hits the liability in the cash, so it doesn't go through an expense account, so we really don't budget for that. Then the next one is the emergency reserve fund, and again, the only thing that's in here are anticipated revenues with interest. So the budget right now does not include doing anything with the emergency reserve fund, doesn't include transferring extra money into it or transferring money out of it right now. So we wanted to make the change, we could do that. Anything on either of those funds? Okay, tab 10, the vehicle replacement program. So the first page there shows the revenue, and you'll see that last year we had budgeted $893,000 for sales tax. This year we're dropping it to $632,000 because we're having more of it go to the general fund to go for those transfers to convention tourism and the capital projects fund. We also budget a minimal amount for the sale of fixed assets. We might look at raising that at some point, but we're just trying to be conservative and just sort of do a minimal amount. The next page then gives a list of the different vehicles that are currently up for replacement. And we have, as a carryover, the changeover of a couple of some squad cars. So we've purchased the cars, they've not been changed over yet, so we just have to list that expense again in this year's budget. We also have we're currently budgeting as a carryover the replacement of a fire pickup truck. And right now because it didn't need to be replaced yet, we've been holding off on it and have not replaced it. We wanted to be able to maintain those cash balances and, as Trustee Emery talked about earlier, want to make sure that we hold off on the purchases we don't need immediately. So we're planning to carry that over so that if we do need to replace it, we're able to do that. And then the new items for replacement are a bucket truck and a chipper truck in Public Works, a one-ton dump, a pickup truck, and then the water meter truck as a replacement for water.
Spencer, on the fund revenue, you have the DuPage Mayors and Managers auction, estimated income on $32,000. What's up for sale this year? What are we taking out of service?
Well, I know we've taken several out of service right now. I think we're waiting on a few of them to go to the auction still. And then the next year's, the things that are coming out would be, the items that we're looking at replacing. So those items would be coming out of service, and then we'd be replacing them. So,
Do you want a list of those vehicles?
yeah, we can give you a list of.
Okay, one of the items, and I know that we've talked about this item in several cases, is the old aerial truck we have.
Right.
Now, we bought a new piece of equipment for over $1 million. Now, we have this old piece of equipment sitting, not being used, and I understand that it was, I understand it was up for sale maybe at one point in time or whatever, but I think before it gets any older, we either get it to an auction someplace or we find a way to sell it. Now, one of the thoughts that I had on that, hopefully you can get a fair amount for it, but maybe what we might want to consider doing with some of those funds is purchasing a fourth ambulance for the fleet. I just don't see where this village needs 2 aerial trucks. It just doesn't. The only reason we have the one is basically because of Oak Brook Hills.
Right.
Marriott,
and Twin Lakes.
Whatever, Twin Lakes. But the other side of that is, too, you have so many departments around you that have those pieces of equipment. Here we are, a small town, a paid-on-call fire department, and we have 2 aerial trucks.
Wasn't that discussed before that it was going to be sold?
I know that we've discussed this before about selling this piece of equipment.
It was declared surplus in 2003 and directed to be sold through a company called, I don't recall, I've got the paperwork sitting on my desk. And it was marketed by them. We were unable to sell it when the ISO folks came through and did a re-rating at some point. That was one of the things that, because we still had it, was sort of figured in the calculation of our rating. The chief had some concerns that, since that was calculated in there and we had moved to the Class 2, that might be enough to move us to Class 3 if we were to get rid of it. In conversations I've had with Trustee Fleming about this prior to this meeting, we've done some research into the whole ISO rating program and have determined that it probably isn't going to make that much difference in terms of the original argument for the lower ISO rating, which was residents would pay lower property insurance because of the lower class. Well, the facts are that, and we've talked to a number of brokers and insurance agents, they ban them. So you can go through like the first 1 through 4.
4 is abandoned.
And you're not going to get a difference in property insurance price.
So, the basic thing is your ISO rating, be it 1 to 4.
Right.
It's going to be a blanket scenario on what your insurance costs are going to be.
So I guess
I check. I have a lot of things with USAA banking, And I checked with them on this ISO rating. And they said, yeah, it's nice to have, it's really a nice thing, but, you know, if it falls within the 1 to 3, 1 to 4 range, yeah, you know. They said, because most villages have reasonable fire equipment, and things are taken care of fast, or there's, you know, there's mutual aid involved. But I hate to see a piece of equipment like this sit and deteriorate from non-use. It's a very valuable piece of equipment. It was a very expensive piece of equipment. But for it to sit and not produce,
It's just appreciating its value to
yeah,
where
I mean, and each year that goes by.
Let me
it
suggest
just
this.
drops
If you want to, I guess, give redirection, I mean, I don't think we have to declare surplus again.
No.
But the direction would be, we're not going to invest anything more in terms of the recertification that's done on an annual basis. We're not going to reinvest, you
Yeah,
know,
take
any
it out
more
of service.
maintenance costs. And let's redouble our efforts, sell it. And then, of course, that revenue would go back into the vehicle
Right.
replacement fund.
And just as a point of curiosity, if we could perhaps get a review of how that's been utilized since
Oh, actual,
2003?
like how it's,
Like
calls
how-
it's been on them? Okay.
And, you know, has it been a case where the other truck has been out? Yeah, I would like a little more information on how it's being used. And then I'd also like the chief to be able to, you know, give his opinion.
But even if the other truck is out of service, that's why you have mutual aid from your other towns.
No, I understand that. I would just like to understand
How it's been used.
I'd like to see how we've
I
been
know it
using
was worked a couple of times when the bucket was out of order. Instead of calling in mutual aid, I know they utilized it a couple of times, but I don't know how often to make it reasonable, and I don't know what type of repairs it's
Yeah.
in.
It's worth asking the question, because
Yeah,
we
I'd
find
like
out
to
it's been
know.
used a half a dozen times,
Right.
so.
So I'd like to know.
So, and the other thing, Trustee Emery, you wanted a list of what comprises that anticipated revenue, the vehicles that we're going to be sending to
Yeah,
auction.
because, I mean, if we were estimating that we're going to get 32,000 from auction, which ones are going?
Oh, well, we're talking about the new vehicles, too. Public Works Director's here. Would you please do me a favor? Ask the mechanic how he can put an hour meter on the squad cars instead of mileage.
You want the meter on the car.
I would really like to see an hour meter attached to our squads.
That's not complicated.
I think you're going to get a better idea, because when people look at a vehicle replacement for a squad, and they see we're replacing a squad that has 60 or 65,000 miles on it, or 70,000 miles on it, they're going, well, you know, that's almost brand new. Well, what they don't understand, or what they don't realize, is the amount of time that engine constantly runs.
Running 20 hours a day.
Right. So that is more of a telling scenario on a vehicle than the miles. Hours
Like an airplane.
predicate. Yeah, I mean, hours predicate your maintenance schedule 90% of the time. It also is going to tell you the wear and tear on the engine of a vehicle. I mean, I've asked several
Even
times.
specify it, you know, when they're bid, I mean.
Yeah.
Just taking Deputy Chief Brunswick, we're not sure, we believe there's something in there, talking with the mechanic, there may actually be something in there already. I know this was discussed years ago. I know when I asked to have that in there, there was no need, but no, Deputy Chief Brunswick, there's maybe something in there, so we'll check with
Maybe
Phil.
there's a way to pull the computer or something.
With the-
Yeah, because, I mean, that's going to give you a better idea. So when you get ready to rotate one of these vehicles or move it out at 65 or 70,000 miles, and I mean, I know that Trustee Klevenhouse had the question, why are you getting rid of this vehicle at 60 or 65,000 miles? It seems like it's, you know, whatever.
I'll correct you, they've gotten rid of them at 40,000.
Right.
That's where I
Right.
really start hitting
And
the ball.
And that's why I say, I think we need to look at the hours on the engine versus the miles on the chassis.
And I don't know if Phil takes it, we'll get you
Okay,
answers.
so you'll get back to us?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thank you. We can move on.
I asked Ron to call Chief Trout because we have questions on things involving fire department vehicles. And if we're working on the budget, I don't want to wait till, you know, 3 weeks from now, so that if it's not a fire call-out, I'd like him back here so we can ask him the questions and see what's going on with that stuff.
Okay,
All right.
move on.
The next section in the vehicle replacement program is just the listing of our vehicles. And then, so that's there sort of for your information. You can look through that. And then, if there's any other questions about the vehicle replacement program? General? Okay. Moving on to capital projects then. Tab 11. We have in here, you'll also notice, it's down almost at the bottom, another board transfer from corporate fund, so another $240,000. So this is, again, that money that we're not putting in the vehicle replacement program, we're transferring to these other funds. The second page in here shows items that were originally proposed for the capital projects budget, but have been cut preliminarily. Obviously, if it's the board's direction that we put some of these back in, we can do that. But just for your information, these are items that were discussed and have been eliminated. I just wanted to note that with the police, rebuild the evidence room for $30,000, as we've already talked about, there's a much lower dollar amount in the police department budget already, and that remains there. This was simply a higher dollar amount for a little bit larger scope of work. So the following pages detail what is included in the capital projects budget. We have in here, under professional services, the first things that you'll see are Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the comprehensive plan. We had originally talked about trying to get $60,000 in last year's budget and $60,000 in this year's budget. Because the work was not performed, we're not able to expense it to last year's budget. It's a carryover, but that's okay because that meant that $60,000 that we thought we'd spend last year, we didn't spend. So we have it to carry forward. So both of those are here. We've got inspection engineering for Eagle Creek litigation, and we've got DuPage County permit fees, we've got some engineering for Hidden View drives, and then we also have our cost for our TIF consultant in here as well, $30,000. Under building purchase improvements, you'll see that there's a lot of items with the zero. Those were the many different requests that were made originally. The items that remain in here right now for consideration are $50,000 for fire range replacement, for the firearms range replacement at police, $2,500 for the air filter purifier for the evidence room, which was mentioned at our last meeting, and then $59,000 for replacement for the roof at fire headquarters. Are there any questions on those items?
We pay
I
$66,000
have a
a
question.
year for copiers?
We do. Yes, it's our lease with the copiers. It includes the toner, at least the majority of the toner. Yeah.
How many copiers do we have?
I think Glenn could probably answer that question very well.
Here he comes.
Here he comes.
He just
Hobbling
can't
in.
run as fast as he used to.
Sorry, Glenn, I didn't mean to make you...
I don't know exactly the number we have, but the last 2 times we renegotiated a copier lease, we've reduced the number of copiers inside the village. The biggest thing that drives about every 5 years, we'll renew the copier lease and get new copiers in. Most of it has to do with changes in technology and the existing copier is not working with the current software that is shipping, like Windows. This may be the first time where we'll be able to not have to renew or replace the copiers at the end of the lease and go 1 or 2 years, because we own them at the end of the lease. And then just pay for the maintenance on them, which is the toner, the repair, and so forth. So what you're seeing is not only the lease of the buyout of the equipment, but all of the maintenance, the toner that goes into those copiers.
They're more than copiers. It's
Correct.
a bulk printer, it's a scanner, it's all-purpose.
Yeah, and we've eliminated almost every desktop printer. There's very few desktop printers left in the village. Everything is printed off of these copiers, so.
And from a staff perspective too, with the Jenny, maybe the number of FOIA requests we're getting,
We have to
you
have
have
a
to
lot of
have copiers that are fast and dependable and can crank out what the public requests to see.
It's the cost of doing business.
It is, yeah.
Definitely
And every
is.
time it comes up, we scrutinize, we determine, do we really need copiers where they're at? This building alone has been reduced, I think, at least 2 copiers from when we first moved into this building. Police has gone down at least 2 copiers. Fire has gone down 1 copier. We've eliminated the copier completely that was at Station 2, and we just have a small little standalone unit that's in there that we own. So every time we do go through that lease, we scrutinize it with the department heads and take out what we can, so,
Thank you.
no problem.
I have a question for the police department. The firearms range replacement, is that a luxury or a necessity? Do we have other communities that don't have firearm range?
Clarendon Hills utilizes ours. We have an intergovernmental agreement with Clarendon Hills. They use our range in exchange for a firearms training system, electronic firearm training system. Currently, right now, as I said the other night, we're currently using an outdoor range elsewhere in DuPage County, located about 10 minutes away. So for the summertime, we're okay, with the exception of inclement weather. Our range right now is old. It's 13 years old. Again, it can't be repaired. That's why we wanted to. Can it work now? Can, with the 5,000 repairs, which we budgeted elsewhere under our budget, that can't keep us going. We wanted to let the board know or put this on the radar. This needs to get done. If we have the money, fine. If it needs to get put off, it can get put off. It's not a necessity.
So it's not a necessity? I mean,
It is
$50,000
because if the range breaks then and it can't be repaired, then we're without a range, and then now you run into a problem of officers not being able to qualify, not being in our training, you run into a liability issue.
So there's
It
not
goes
another
on.
place they could go?
We could.
You know, like Clarendon
Downers-
Hills comes here, could we?
Downers Grove has one in the past. We've done that when we didn't have a range previously for our facility. But most, Hinsdale used to have one. I don't believe they have one anymore. We're the only one in the area, but we could, again, look with Downers Grove to see. But there again, too, that's going to be also additional use, additional wear and tear. Are they going to want some type of monetary compensation for that as well?
Does Clarendon Hills pay us?
No. The exchange for Clarendon Hills is they have it's called a, used to be a FATS, Firearms Judgmental Training System. I forget, MILO, which stands for? Okay.
Don't ask me. That's a good name.
It's a simulator. It's an electronic simulator where the officers shoot laser weapons.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's different scenarios, different trainings. Right.
Paintballs.
Downers Grove, the agreement with Downers Grove is we can use that equipment anytime we want, 24 hours a day. The exchange was their officers can come over, I believe, once a month and qualify, and their officers, I don't know the department strength, it's,
You mean Clarendon Hills?
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Yeah, Downers Grove.
I'm sorry, Clarendon Hills comes over, their strength is a lot smaller. There's wear and tear on a range, but again, we also exchange of equipment.
So we do the simulator there, and they come and do live ammo at ours?
Yes, they pay for their own ammunition. They just had some storage space. However, as I said, our range right now,
But it's still usable right now?
right now, provided we get some repairs in there, but it's very antiquated and it needs to be completely gutted and put new rails in, all new equipment needs to go in.
And that's not a luxury, that's a necessity?
Eventually, yes, because if it breaks, then we have no place to go. During the summer, again, we're fine. In the wintertime, we have no place to go and qualify. We could change our policies for qualifying, but there again, too, God forbid we ever have an incident, but if we have an incident, again, our training is also called into question.
How often do they qualify?
Once a month. We run qualification shoots once a month. You must qualify once every 3 months. How many times a year? 4 times a year, once every 3 months.
So if we send everybody during all the good weather, good months, down to Lamont?
Lamont, yes, sir.
Is that what we're doing now, or are we still using inside?
No, right now, starting April, in the month of April, our first shoot, I almost think we didn't go in March. April, we did shoot outside. Our first shoot this month was outside. We schedule all our shoots outside, all the way through till October. If the weather holds out, we'll go to November. From November till approximately March is when we're inside, with the exception of inclement weather. We also have other options, too, that we're looking with simunition training, which would also look to offset firearms qualifications as well. Doesn't replace it, but it's an addition to.
It's
So,
also a cost factor that we pay for this for the guys going to the training.
For Lamont, I believe there's a fee in the budget. Lamont charges the rent. It's $350 or $450.
I mean, our guys get paid while they're there.
We send our officers off on duty to go. We do not have to pay overtime because per the contractual with the agreement with the Fraternal Order of Police, For roll call and for shoots that are, they go to off-duty, they're compensated. So it's not an overtime rate, but it's a compensation rate. So yes, they do go out, they go on their own time, they go off-duty, or we try to get everybody who's on duty to go.
Well, have we thought maybe, now that we've done this consolidation with the TCOs, with downers, have we thought maybe sitting down and talking to them, either we use their range and help work out a situation that would be compatible for both police departments, or work something out of theirs, depending on the shape their range is in, work it out to where our range could be brought back up to par, and they could maybe do away with theirs? I mean, has there been any thought given to that?
We haven't, we shared services with the repairs of the range. As I mentioned, the repair person is only one in the country that can repair our current equipment, which Downers Grove also has. So that person comes out, so we're going to try to coincide our repair time at the same time Downers comes out, and then we would share the transportation costs. As far as sharing the services of the range, we have not explored that now. But
If we got a new range, would we get the same type of equipment where there's only one guy in the country who can fix it?
No, it's more up to date, no, we definitely make sure that.
Good question. That's a really good question.
Unequivocally, emphatically, no. That was something that would not be.
That's a bright light there.
Has this been
Yeah.
has this price been bidded out, like, you know what it's going to cost, or is this just an estimate cost?
It's an estimate by our range officer, Master Sergeant Dale. He gave, he's also the firearms expert and range expert in this.
How many bids did he get?
We didn't. He just went out to try to see if we would have cost what it would cost me, so we estimated at $50,000. We didn't go out for bids because we didn't know if this would pass.
What would be the downside of
conservative
putting this
thinking.
off till next year?
It can, yes. I'm saying.
And to me, that's a really big expense that I keep feeling like it's a little bit of a luxury because we have Plan B, that we can make it work.
How long would the downtime be?
Sorry, it's a budget.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I know. It is something that we've thought of that, again, you'll see it in there for the main reason is we wanted, number one, understanding that if this is cut, we're a whole 100% in agreeable it's cut. We wanted to get this on the board's radar, to notice that this is something that we need. Can it go till next year if we get the repairs done? Yes, it can. But we want to let you know that when it does come down and it is imperative, we don't want you to say, why didn't we know about this before? I wanted you to
Duly
know about
noted,
it now.
next year is good with me.
That's fine.
Does everybody agree?
We all have to have a
lot
Plan
of
B.
money.
And in the meantime, could you
If
have
we have
Sergeant
other
Dale
options.
make a concerted effort to find some companies that know how to do this and get some bids instead of winging it?
No, he's talked to companies, that's how he got that. He just didn't pull a figure. He did research and he did come up with a number. It's not that he just guessed 50,000. He did do research and does have that, but
And I have to ask, does that mean we can't use Clarendon Hill stuff if they can't use our range? Is that what this, too, or what?
our relationship with Clarendon Hills is such that I think we'd still be okay.
Okay.
As God, I can't even talk now. As the various statutes change and how, and it's Sergeant Dale that does it, when he gathers the spent bullets and they're disposed of and recycled and lead and yada, yada. Those costs are going to continue to escalate, and we do need a range, and we do need it replaced. It's in bad condition. And it's possible that it's going to cost us more later. What I would like to do is put it off to next year, but line item 25,000 in this year, so we don't go next year, well, now it's going to be 60, and where are we going to get this money? At
Right.
least we.
Yeah, I
line
think that's a
item
good solution.
Part of it this year, so we've paid for part of it.
And even if there's any way of doing it over two budgets, maybe, I don't know, can you do part of it this year and delay part of it until
Unless
next
we
year?
would, again,
And-
prioritizing our purchases, there's something we could do wait to the end of the year, wait to see if maybe next April next year, we do the purchase and then split it over two budgets, and I will yield to Spencer. I don't know if that's possible or not, but I'm sure that once it's installed and it's put in, they're going to want to be paid. They aren't going to want deferred.
I think that's a good solution. 25,000, sort of a contingency fund in the event something happens. The rest.
Yeah, and then it's
or
not such a hit
plan on it
next
for
year.
next year.
Right. And again, we're hoping that.
Chief,
just,
what's the downtime? Well, how long do they think it's going to take?
I don't know.
No idea. Huh?
I just had to task Sergeant Dale with, if we were to ask for this replacement, how much it would cost, because he came to me with this, with the antiquated equipment. He came with the companies, he checked $50,000. We asked for an estimate to put in, he said $50,000. I don't know how long, because they're going to rip all the metal out. We believe the ventilation system would be okay, but the trap system at the end would probably have to be replaced. All the electronics, I mean, right now, we're working on with electronic things from 13 years ago, where now you can have different scenarios, different actions, better improvement, better training opportunities for our
Where
officers.
with a simunitions system, you wouldn't need the ventilation or anything else.
Simunitions is completely, and I'll get it out forward. The simunitions is actually, it's not rubber bullets, but it's like paintball bullets. And what we do is Sergeant Schlicker oversees that. That training is outside-based scenario with practice traffic stops. We've been using abandoned buildings when Westmont Standard Market gave us
I mean,
the
there's
building.
something similar to that for the range, though, isn't it?
But it still doesn't count towards qualifying. You still have to use your real
Right.
guns and your real
Correct.
bullets.
We're also looking too, is that, if budgets, let's say that the sky falls, we would, change our requirements as to the number of times you'd have to qualify. Ours is a lot more aggressive, a lot more often, and again, we feel it's necessary for our officers' training, and we want to be prepared. We're not going to shoot like the state police or somebody else does once a year. It's too important of a skill that you don't want to not train for. But with the simulations, we were thinking of, if we can't do a shooting or if we can't do a range, we would do the simulations. However, we're also thinking too, if the simulations are almost the same cost as the regular ammunition, so in that case, there may not be a cost savings, but we're looking at that as well. There are electronic ranges where you can have screens shown and electronic based that way. I don't believe what that's Mike's looking at. He's looking at just replacing our current system. Those would cost hundreds of thousands, but I'd love to have one, yes. But I'm also very realistic and have to be aware of our budget concerns.
Yeah, as long as the one we have is workable for now, I think it works to just sort of leave a little contingency fund in and not expend $50,000 to do it now.
No, and
Wait
again,
till next year.
to be clear, I was not expecting it. This was just, to be honest with you, I expected this discussion, and if it was cut, fine, but just as long as the board is aware, so we don't come to you and say, we have to do this now.
Right.
Yes, so Spencer,
Duly
would
noted,
you at
we'll
least
remember.
Thank you.
line item down to 25?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on capital? Okay.
Okay.
Spence.
Yes, well, Chief Trout came back because there were questions about the aerial truck, and then,
Yeah, we can move back.
yeah, you had those.
So then you won't have to stay very long. It looks like you're planned for the evening.
Chief, while you were gone, we had,
We were just
Yeah,
curious.
Lee,
yeah, okay.
The old aerial truck that we have, Chief, how many times?
don't have to be sworn in.
How many times did you know of that it has been used, say, in the past year? The old aerial truck. The old aerial truck that we have in-house right now. How many times would you say that it's been used in the last year?
Matter of fact, we're formulating a response to a request by the village manager over the ladder truck, and we have all that data that we're putting together for the manager and for the board to explain exactly where we're at this time. What I was waiting on was the last bit of information from Ben Brown, the mechanic from Lyle Woodridge. A couple of weeks ago, we had all the ladder testing done for the entire department, including 1829, the old ladder truck, which had successfully completed all the safety tests and all the tests for the ladder truck. So right now, we're looking at just a minimal yearly maintenance on it. As far as how many runs and how many times it's been used as a replacement for the new ladder truck, 1839, we have all that documented. But I remember it was quite significant as far as in and out of service over the last couple of years. But we do have all that information documented, and I can have it for you by Monday morning.
I guess the other question that I have is, do we really need 2 trucks like that in our fleet?
do we really need it? If we remember back when we got the new platform, which was in '02, we immediately tried to sell it. We put it on the market, and through BMP apparatus, it was on the market for a few years, and then we finally had a hit on it through some. It was some company in Eastern Europe who was buying apparatus for, I believe some of you remember that.
Yes.
And was supposed to go to Eastern Europe, and then the deal fell through. Since that time, there hasn't been really any other hits on that. At the same time, the Naperville Fire Department has a sister truck to it, which happens to be a 91. Ours is a 96. I'm sorry, an 86. And so Naperville has a ladder truck that looks identical to ours, except for its newer, lower mileage and whatnot. And that's still sitting there too, and it hasn't been bid on yet either. And so,
They're trying to sell theirs.
so they're
For
trying to
how long
sell.
they've been trying to
right,
sell it.
Right. And so that's out on the market too. And so there's really, what it came down to is this, is that if we're going to keep it, how can we keep it and still make it in the best interest of the village? What it has done is that we put a little money into it over the last couple of years. ISO came out 3 or 4 years ago, went through all of our testing, and then we were able to move our rating from a 3 to a 2 using the points from the reserve ladder truck. And so right now there's no money going into the vehicle other than normal maintenance. We are using it, and I'll have the information for you by this coming Monday as far as how much use we're getting out of it, but we are getting use out of it.
Frank, can you also get for us an accounting of how much money has been expended on it?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have
Will that
some
be
of
included in
already.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, matter of fact, I've
got some of that.
shared some information with the village manager about what the cost has been. Actually, we're spending more money on the new one more than the older
For
one.
maintenance.
Well, I'm thinking if there's not a market for this vehicle, which it seems there might not be, and it's not a great expenditure to keep it in service as a backup or in tandem with or whatever, you know, that may be better than just letting it sit dormant and becoming a relic.
Well, that's what the, after we give you the information, then, because I know the manager was looking for that, we want to do what was in the best interest of the village. And for the most part, other towns do not have a reserve truck. There's only maybe 3 or 4 towns in the area that have actual reserve piece of equipment like that. And, but since we are using it, since it's here, we are using it to the greatest extent, which is to lower our ISO rating.
Now, it was declared.
Well, I think the other thing is with the information that you compile for Monday or as soon as you can, is to go back and take a look at the ISO scenario, please,
All right?
as far as the rating with or without that truck.
If we take the truck off the shelf right now, we immediately drop from a 2 to a 3.
Okay.
And now, what does that mean for the average homeowner? Absolutely nothing, all right? But it does mean something to businesses, and it depends upon how each business insurance is written. And so, why it might save Jewel Osto, $50,000, it might not save somebody else as much, or maybe even more so. Depends on how it's rated, how their insurance views the ISO rating system, and so on. But all I know is that if we have, anything over a 3 doesn't affect single-family residents. It only affects commercial, industrial.
Now, the truck was declared surplus in 2003, and even though we're using it and stuff, it's never come off surplus status, correct?
Status in the sense of, no,
No formal action was ever taken.
we've never taken any action.
Okay,
to
well, I'm just
rescind
curious. I mean,
that.
you declare it surplus, but then it appears to be a member of the fleet.
Right.
It should either come off as surplus, or if it's going to stay surplus, decide whether we're going to keep it. So I can't see keeping something as surplus if it is a backup and being used and all that. So the information that, that you're putting together.
It's almost like being a rhino, a name only. The surplus is probably a name only. We are using it. It got our ISO rating moved up. And while it's out there, probably if someone came to us and said, if there is, the Village of Westmont, are you still interested in selling your vehicle? Then I'd bring it back to the board and see whether or not the amount even offered would be beneficial. Because at the time we were offering 90. The last time I spoke with the gentleman from B&P Apparatus, he said realistically it's probably around 55, 56, maybe 60,000. And so that's where the value is at this time.
I don't expect this for Monday, but at some point in time, if we could just get a better understanding of what impact it would have on the businesses if we were to fall to an ISO 3. From the Ma and Pa shop on Cass Avenue to Walgreens, and I don't know if there's a way that you can just get us a range.
Yeah, each individual business
information.
has a different insurance, and it depends upon how that insurance,
if we
as far as I know, Ron,
if we
maybe
could
you
get some
have more
examples from
insight on
insurance
this than-
companies, just some sort of an idea.
We'll get you some information.
Yeah.
It sounds to me, though, if we leave it as a surplus, then we have the option, if he does get a bite on it, he could just turn around and just say, okay, I can still sell it, where if we take it off surplus, now we got to go back to the board and vote on it again. And that's why I don't know.
I was just going to say, I'm not sure, and I've talked to the village attorney, if there's an action we need to, rescind the ordinance.
Well, the reason I'm asking is Irma might care. Do you remember several years ago when Stone Park went out on a run and the truck flipped, and unfortunately one of the firefighters lost his life when the truck went on its side? I don't ever want to be in a situation where we are depending on the truck and God forbid something happens and they come back to us and say, you declared that surplus in 2003, why was it on the road?
Right. Well, that's why we have it checked, why when we do our ladder check for all of our apparatus and all of our ground ladders, that is also part of the fleet. It goes through the same tests that everything else does. It has the same tests as the other ladder truck, every piece of ground ladder on it, along with the main, all the hoses and connections, everything to it. And so otherwise, it would be out of service and not used at all.
Okay, well, here's my suggestion. You put all of the information that's been asked together, and then we can look at it for a public safety meeting where we talk about how do we want to declare it, what do we want to do with it? Keep it, get rid of it, surplus, back in action, whatever. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, that's fine with me, and that's actually what we've been working on. We started out, we wanted to wait until after the ladder testing, and then we wanted to talk to the Westmont mechanics, and then and he said, well, let's talk to the Lyle mechanics, and so we've been running everyone down, and so we can gather all this information. And as we've moved along with it, I have been sharing some of that information with the village manager. All right.
Great.
Very much.
Any other questions for Frank?
I think that was the only question we had for him.
Was it?
Sorry we brought you back.
But
That's
thanks.
fine. I didn't
It
know-
ended up not being a budget item
I
anyway.
thought you were going to go into some
No.
type of a special session, and so then we left.
No,
Nope.
but it answered
We
our
were coming up
questions.
with questions for you, and we came out, and you were gone.
And I'm still, thank you very much.
That's okay.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Frank.
Thank you.
All right.
Spencer?
The next item that's on the list in capital projects is the headquarters roof repairs for fire. And that includes repairing the roof, and part of that is they've got to move some air conditioning units, and it's all part of that same cost of $59,000. Okay. The next account is street improvements, and we've got, the Hidden View Drive, 60th Stream Bait stabilization. You'll note in here that the brick crosswalks and pedestrian timers have been removed. They're on the list of, that we've just looked at previously, about items that had been requested but had been cut, so they're not included in the current budget. In other equipment, we have a tree management system for $52,000, and this one also had a $20,000 grant, and this one we did receive the $20,000. We have received the authorization to go ahead with it with the $20,000 grant. So we will receive the $20,000 if we do go ahead with this project. Then there's the sign inventory, which is a requirement that we need to do, and that's for the $10,000. Then the next section is the stormwater improvements. Some of them are the items that have appeared this past year in the budget. These are sort of the ones that were ranked as the higher priority to get done, and also a little bit lower cost to do these. Then the next, any question? The next section is simply the debt on the vehicle replacement leases, as well as the 9.5 acres. And the amortization schedules for both of those are also included as the next 2 pages. Any other
I have a question.
questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question for Steve May. The tool cat loader and the holder loader, did we put those off last year as well? Is this the second year that we've said we'll wait?
Well,
Can you tell me a little bit more about what they do?
more than 2 years, but what they are, it is not replacement equipment, it's equipment that we don't even have, and it's just more, they are both essentially kind of in between a Bobcat and a full-size construction vehicle, and it's all geared towards winter maintenance downtown. Do the sidewalks more efficiently, the platform, and things like that. Right now, we stick brooms on the front of a Bobcat, and I've had issue with that.
We kind of jimmy rig it?
Well, that and, they're not designed for that type of work. I mean, they can do that function, but in the downtown, the spaces are tight and everything, and we've had, instances before with, banging into buildings or dropping a wheel of the Bobcat off the platform and stuff because it's not the right vehicle to do the job. We make it work, but this is just better equipment for those purposes, but not, nothing really happens if we don't get them. We just continue to do business as we always have.
So it's sort of a wish list kind of thing, more than a
Kind
necessity?
of, I'm not saying it's not, a useful item, but there's nothing urgent about it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other capital projects questions? If not, we can move on to water. Now, the first page in water is that chart that we added in here. And we had received some questions about how much do other funds owe the water fund. And so this chart basically answers that question, shows the amounts that are owed to the water fund and what those amounts represent. So I'll just start at the bottom just to let you know, in case there were any questions, the amount that was already done for the early retirement incentive has been paid back. That amount has been paid back, and that is done. The amounts that are still on the books as items that someone else owes to the water fund are all from the general fund. And back in January of 2005, we had a $500,000 loan that was approved by the board from the water fund to the general fund. And then the next 2 items are auditor adjustment entries, and they're very similar to the adjustment we talked about with convention tourism, where at the end of the fiscal year, so at the end of April 2009, the auditor said, for bookkeeping purposes, we're going to transfer $460,000 from water into the general fund and have the general fund say they owe water. And again, this was never reversed immediately thereafter. So right now, the general fund owes the water fund $971,000. Any questions on that?
I guess I have to ask some serious questions as to why. I mean, even from 2005, 2006, the things being the way they were, why we didn't try to repay some of that back into the fund. I mean, there were some good years between that point and when things went into the tank, so to speak. Bad choice of words dealing with water, but, you know, it's a case of,
We missed.
I mean, why didn't we, somewhere along the line, put something back into the
Right.
water fund?
You're talking about the 500,000?
Starting with the 500,000.
Right.
yeah.
Even at that time, though, we were cutting because we were not meeting, our revenue trends were going down, if I remember, on sales tax started to go down at that point. That's a question that, and I'm not sure that we got a complete answer on that. We were going to go back and check to see if we had made some payments. There were payments that were scheduled to be made.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know, I mean, if we didn't do it in the place, we did not account for it the way that we should have to reduce this. And I've checked the other places I can think of sort of as the kind of where, well, maybe we could code it to this. And they weren't there either. So, I mean, we'll keep looking to see if it got just miscoded somehow. But we're not seeing it in any of the places you would expect to find it that we had repaid that at all. I know that Ron had said he thought that we may have intended to repay it, and it may just be something that, was intended to be repaid, and the transfer just never actually got made. That's a possibility.
What if any, would there be any long-range problems or whatever if for some reason the money never goes back into the water fund? I mean, what consequence is there of that? I mean, isn't there some type of a statute or whatever that, I mean, is there a period of time that it has to be paid back into the water fund?
No.
Or, I mean, I guess what I'm looking at now is the general fund, as we're sitting here talking tonight, the shape that the general fund is in, just looking at it from preliminary situation. Not only do we have that scenario, but now the general fund basically owes the water department $1 million.
Right.
That's a little disturbing.
Right, it's a lot of money.
I mean,
Well, we've talked with the village attorney about these different transactions, and he, from a legal standpoint, he doesn't see any issue at this point. But, I mean, we're in complete agreement, we need to pay that back. And we wanted to talk about, some processes to do that and get it reversed.
yeah, I mean, we got to do something.
Is there any earmarking to show exactly what that money went to? That we know we have to pay it back, what was borrowed out of there?
Well, the 500 was detailed in the budget for that year.
That was an election year. I think there was a big controversy at that time going on about borrowing out of there and stuff. But I'm thinking of more like 2007 and 2009. I'm trying
audit
to remember
ones?
what we borrowed out of there for, if it was just, again, borrowing from Peter to give to Paul.
Yeah, it was not any specific item that we said, I mean, there was not a conscious decision that said we want to borrow from the water fund to be able to make these payments. We'd simply done what we do with the general fund, we'd made the payments, and as of April 30th, the total cash we had at that time was negative in the general fund.
Right.
So the auditors just said, okay, you borrowed it from water. That's how you used it.
But don't we have to vote on that?
Yeah, but
No.
no, not with an auditor scenario on that. But the other thing is, if I remember correctly, I think, wasn't part of what we did in the one term was to try to bolster our reserve fund to make sure that we weren't in a precarious situation? I mean, the 2009 scenario, because I think there was a lot of concern with the reserve fund.
You would ask us to go back, I think, that particular year and add some additional money into the reserve fund. Is that what you're thinking of? I don't know if that's correlates to that, but.
I feel like I remember that.
Yeah, I mean, because there was a great concern predicated on the amount that was in the reserve fund at that point in time, and there was some fear factor involved with what was going on with the economy to make sure that we kind of had some coverage, that we put some money from water over into, even though it was an auditor's adjustment or whatever, but we actually asked it to be put to the reserve fund.
Lee, I think you're right, because wasn't there, where our cash balance was going so low?
Yep.
We wanted to make sure there was enough to meet payroll and
Yep.
certain other fixed operating expenses. I think I kind of recall
I think
that.
you're right, Lee, I remember that.
Because that was in April.
Yep, because it
Been a
was.
lot of
I
discussion
know-
about it.
Yeah, I know that we were back and forth, and it was, for some reason, some number like $317,000 or $320,000 sticks in my mind, because the difference in the two would have, I wouldn't say a make and break scenario, but we were looking at the scenario of what would happen if, like kind of like what we're looking at now, if things really got worse and we were tagged and we had to be able to come up with, some expense money to take care of some daily running of the village. But I seem to think that that's what that was for.
Seems a weird number, though. There's more than that's got to be in there for the
Well,
461. I mean, it's.
Yeah, but that's why I say one of the numbers that's sticking in my mind is $317,000 to $320,000. I mean, without looking at the actual budget, because there were a couple of different lines there.
Right.
Dealing with that number, it was like what, the scenario with this and then the scenario with this. And where we would be if one thing happened versus the other. And I think we went to the stronger side to protect that fund. But I mean, the biggest thing is, it's, you see so much now in deficit spending and that, and I guess I shouldn't make it as deficit spending, but I mean, here we are trying to go through this and make this work, knowing, unfortunately, that we may be facing another scenario that may put a crimp in us, and we're sitting here looking at having to pay back, like I said, almost $1 million back into the water fund. I think we need to find some way to get some of that back in there.
No, we're in complete agreement with that, and that's why we wanted to bring this discussion to you. We can't afford to pay it back all this year.
Right.
But we want to start doing that, and, wanted to make sure you guys were aware of the situation.
Okay.
Right. Moving into the water, the first one shows water's revenues, and obviously our biggest revenue in water is our water sales. It's the majority of the revenue that we receive. The next page shows the list of preliminary cuts that the water department has made. And again, it's the same setup as with the other departments. One item I wanted to make sure is mentioned with regards to water. In professional services, there is one other item that we're going to be adding, and we'll get you new pages on that. But we need to add in an extra $4,300 for required copper testing. It's something that has to be done every 3 years. And we just received the dollar amount very recently, and so it's not reflected in here, but it can be added in. So we'll be doing that. Just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Spencer, under professional services, how do we do 10 eye exams for $1?
Yeah, that's should be zero.
Any item that shows a dollar on it is something that was removed. It's just
Yeah.
Oh,
stayed on the printout. So we're not, it's a zero.
okay. It's not like an open purchase order.
Right.
Oh, yes, that's correct. So those should be zero, as well as the GIS updates, and apparently the engineering on the next page too. Interesting.
Gremlins in the
Okay.
program.
Apparently so. Apparently so. We've got, sort of on the last page, we've got some of our larger items. We've got building purchase improvements. There's a couple of items that we have not yet made the payments for them. They were in this year's budget, which included the resurfacing the lot behind the water department, as well as water division, as well as the roof replacement. So those are both items that were in this year's budget. They're being carried forward to the next year's budget, and that one underneath it should be a zero. Again, good thing we're getting new pages anyway.
What if we paid those out of the general fund? Would that lower what we have to pay back to water fund?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if we have the money in there to pay it, do that.
I mean, creative financing. I mean, I
Yep.
don't know.
I mean, yeah. We could do it that way. We could, yeah, if we've got the money available in the general fund, we could transfer the fund to water and say, we don't owe you as much, and then water could use that to pay those. Or we could just pay them out of the general fund and then just, account for it. Move the accounting and things. But yeah, we could do that. There's also a large increase you'll see in meter system improvements went from 50,000 to 405,000. And the big increase in there is the meter replacement program. And that's only to replace 1,000 meters, and it's a very small portion of the amount of meters that need to be replaced over the next several years. So this is kind of beginning the program, but it's a very small drop in the bucket. We also have the water plant improvements. We're carrying over the PA station and epoxy paint. The new item in that category is the raw water storage tank. It's listed there. I think that's the majority of the changes there. You will notice on the second page there's a debt principal where we're paying off the Bull-Rington water main and the Lincoln water mains. The loan that we received for that, we're paying those off. So that is newly in there. Any questions in water?
I have a question, Ron, you'll probably know this one. Under legislation, insurance is split with insurance underwater for liability and workers' comp. And under legislation, it's $279,570, and water's picking up $200,000. Legislation covers E&O, police, fire, all kinds of stuff. How come such a large chunk is $200,000 underwater?
Historically, we've split it between those two funds because, again, the theory behind the insurance pool is your revenues drive your risk.
Right.
And obviously, the water fund's a sizable operating fund, so there's a lot of revenue that's generated, a lot of things that go on with that fund and the operations of the water system. So the rationale is, to assign part of that cost of that risk to that
Okay,
fund.
because of the size of their fund. I mean, Irma doesn't care how we split it up,
No.
just so long as they get one check.
They don't.
But is that the reasoning, is because of the size of the water operating fund that they pick up a?
Yeah, I mean, it can be
sizable
changed.
portion?
We've adjusted, I think, over the years, percentage-wise.
No, I'm not saying we changed it. I was just curious how, why
That's
it's
the rationale.
busted up like that. All right, that's all. I just wanted to.
All right. Moving on to the motor fuel tax fund. One thing that you'll notice in the motor fuel tax fund is you'll see on the first page the revenues are $695,000, and then on the back page you'll see that the projected expenses are $2.9 million. Now, generally that's not a good thing, but in cases of capital projects funds where we have the money that we've been saving up from prior years, and we've been setting it aside, we really need to take a look at the cash balances as well. And this is, a lot of these expenses that you'll see on here you'll see the -C/O, which means it's a carryover. And several of these expenses are items that have been carried over from previous years. A lot of them are grants that we have with the state. So it's kind of dependent upon when the state does the work, when the state moves things forward, and when things take a while from the state, we carry it over from budget year to budget year. However, we are beginning to run into a problem, and you'll see if you flip back to the very beginning, I think it's like the third or fourth page in there, the funds carried forward. We looked at this briefly, the very beginning. So it's the third page in, it's the one that is landscape, so you have to turn your budget sideways. you'll see with the motor fuel tax fund, we're estimating a cash balance of 2.9 million. We're expecting 2.29 million, and then we're expecting a net change in the budget of 2.27 million. So we're expecting to be left with only about $14,000 left in this fund to fund future years. So that is a little bit concerning, and we've been looking at other ways to fund some of these road projects. The motor fuel tax budget has in it, you'll notice at the back, $100,000 worth of resurfacing, $500,000 carried over, and then an additional $500,000. And we know that that's important, and it has been discussed as a priority about, looking at fixing our streets. And so we wanted to at least kind of mention a couple of different scenarios that we may consider. We've been kind of tossing around the idea and wanted to sort of get the board's reaction on the idea of coming up with sort of bonding out to do some of these repairs for streets, coming up with a bond and issuing debt for that purpose. And then maybe also roll in possibly the stormwater improvements we had talked about, or some other things. We kind of, the very beginning stage of this, and just sort of wanted, any thoughts or comments?
Spencer, some of the projects, are pricey, some are comparatively small.
Right.
Where did you come up with the budget of motor fuel tax for 2012 at $634,400? It's less than what last year was budgeted at $650, and substantially less than 2011 year-to-date at $796. And obviously, with the higher cost of fuel, sales tax is higher. So where did you get a lower projected revenue?
The way that this motor fuel tax works is this is our shared portion from the state. And so it's based on a per capita expenditure. And so there's two pieces to it. Number one is with our recent census, our population has gone down. So when we get the same amount per capita, we have less population, which would generate less revenue. Additionally, the IML has come out with some new estimates saying they don't think we're going to be getting as high per capita from the state anymore. And so with their lower projections and our lower population, this is the number that if you take what they estimate we'll be getting per capita, times it by our new population, it's that lower amount, which is
we
not.
Started out tonight talking about being conservative and all that. How do you figure in the increased motor fuel tax that the village enacted?
We had put that into the general fund. We can move that into this motor fuel tax fund if that's something the board would like us to do. But last year when we set up the budget, we put it going into the general fund. We could certainly move that if that's.
Well, I'm concerned that we have that gas tax going into the general fund, and then you're talking about the possibility of issuing bonds in order to do construction projects, which most of them are road projects, which it would make sense to me that if you're paying a motor fuel tax and using the roads, we ought to use the money for road construction projects. So rather than issue bonds, I would like to take that from general fund and put it in motor fuel tax, run the numbers and see what we get.
Okay.
Just let's look at what those numbers add up to, how much money you would project we would have to do these road projects. Could you do that?
Yeah, so you're talking about moving some of the money from the general fund into here. Okay.
Yeah, the money that was allocated, well, actually,
What the percentage was that we allocated onto the.
yeah, let me see if I can find out what you allocated, because that'll answer real quick.
Yeah, so at the end of section 2, we have our list of all the detail of all the revenue. And next. Should be here. We can verify what that is, but it should be right here.
450.
Okay. The local motor fuel, 450,000.
How much?
Locomotive fuel, 2.5 cents.
What account number have you got, because they're numerical?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is, okay, right at by, almost to the end.
Yeah.
At 2.5% per gallon, $450,000.
Yeah.
That's a chunka.
Yes.
That's a lot of
So-
money.
Right, so whatever percentage you would like to, we can remove from the general fund and move over to motor fuel. It'll just, have the amount that goes into motor fuel will be reduced from going into the general fund.
Right. All right, let me
fine.
make a note. I want to take a look at that because obviously we're relying on $450,000 being in general fund and certain things that wouldn't be funded and all that. So
Right.
let me look at that over the weekend, take a look at it.
That's certainly an option, and she said does make some sense. Any other questions on motor fuel? All right, then we are almost done. IMRF Social Security Fund. This is fairly basic. It's the fund that we use to fund the pension for the IMRF employees, Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund employees. And one change that you may notice is that this year in the budget, under the expenses, so the second page in, we've broken it up by department, just so that it's clear as to which department's using what amounts of the funds for both the FICA and the IMRF. But, I mean, other than that, there's not a significant change. It's down slightly from last year's budget because we've made some slight personnel changes. There's been some of the voluntary retirements and some of those things. But that is, that one's fairly basic. Any questions on that fund?
Sit down.
Okay, the last tab is just for informational purposes. It's sort of an appendix of some additional information we've got. It goes over some of the different accounts. So you'll notice, as we've seen, all the accounts are coded by code, and this kind of explains what the different codes mean. There's a list of some acronyms, and then there's some terms. And I believe several members of the board have seen this previously on previous budgets, but it's just here again for additional information. Any other questions, comments? Anything else on the rest of the budget?
I think we still have a fair amount of work to do. Got some real head-scratching stuff here to deal with. I just kind of had that feeling that this one was going to be the one that was going to take a little bit longer than the ones from previous years. I don't know, there's just a lot of questions that still need to be answered, I think. We're gonna need the fifth. We don't have a choice. And I agree with Trustee Seneca. I'm not sure we're even gonna be done with it then.
I think, just as a suggestion, we can, maybe all of us kind of mull over what we've talked about so far, get our own ideas, alert Ron, and perhaps come up with an agenda for May 5th with specific things we want to revisit.
We can do that. We can also do additional budget workshops. I mean,
That's another option,
Right now,
certainly.
we're targeting, the 15th for adoption, but we don't have to. We've got to adopt it sometime in the first, quarter of the fiscal year. So if we want to spend more time talking about things and trying to decide how we want to allocate things, we could certainly do that.
Well, I have to agree with what Trustee Seneca made the comment earlier, that if we go a little bit longer with this, as well as extra budget workshops, maybe we're going to get an idea what the knuckleheads down in Springfield are going to do.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the knuckleheads, that's what I call them, because, I mean, it's becoming more and more evident that they want to put the burden back on the people and for their mistakes. And I just, I think it's going to take us longer than the 15th to put this thing to bed. I mean,
And if we have the entire first quarter,
yeah.
Legally, we're fine. We have to
Yeah, 'cause-
adopt the appropriation ordinance within the first quarter. So you
okay.
adopt the budget
So we have to have the
within
budget in order
appropriation ordinance.
to even do that.
I mean, we had a few surprises today that some of us didn't expect, and
But we need to digest.
not only that, but are there any other surprises out there that we still don't know about?
Right. after going through it
We're
again.
not going to tell
and-
you it's a surprise.
I know, well,
If we told you, you'd know.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Hey, it would be fun if you knew ahead of time.
I'm going to leave my paper clips and binder clips here so they cut down on office supplies. You guys can reuse.
Let's just go back to that line item quickly and deduct 67 cents.
Hey, I brought in the binders that were donated by the
I brought a
Power
bunch of
Organization.
binders.
They said, here you go, we don't need them, have at
Yep.
them.
Yep.
Okay, well, I think that pretty much sums it up for this evening. Does anyone have anything else budget related?
I mean, I don't think we need to go into an executive session dealing with anything.
No.
Do we?
No,
I think-
there's no
I think
reason.
there's some other, there's some stuff in other evenings that we're going to have to deal with.
No request for executive session, so we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Emery?
Second, Fleming?
Welcome.
Trustee Emery.
Yes.
Trustee Klebanow.
Yes.
Trustee Fleming.
Yes.
Trustee Scott.
Yes.
Trustee Seneca.
Yes.
We're adjourned.